Other adjustments to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I'm checking in. Can you hear my voice?
You hear us?
Very clear, thank you.
Okay. No adjustments to the agenda, then we'll move on to public comments. Does somebody, thank you, Webb. We'll see if anyone's signed up for public comment here. And looks like we've got 3 people signed up for public comment. You'll have 3 minutes to address the board, and I will, if you'll state your name and where you're from for the record, and then I will start the timer after that. So first one we have is Ellen Otani, followed by Jeff Mollers. You just want to hand him, you can pass them down. Yeah, we'll put it in his box.
Good morning. I am Ellen Otani from Eugene, and I have concerns about Lane County Parks Department's determination to remove the North Bottomlands of the Howard Buford Recreation Area and its nature park classification and reclassify it in the newly written Park and Open Space Master Plan as an urban regional park similar to Alton Baker. Earlier, at one of the earlier meetings, I already provided you with a copy of the web page in which Lane Parks lists the bottomlands under the name of Emerald Meadows at Buford as a 45th park separate from HBRA. The name Emerald Meadows was never discussed or adopted by the Parks Advisory Committee. The names Meadow and Emerald are already taken, one on River Road and one over off of Pioneer Parkway. The definitions for park classifications from the 2013 A Guide to Community Park and Recreation Planning are clear to me. They are very generic because they are trying to help people categorize all types of parks. Nature parks, however, under that definition, may be managed for passive recreation and may contain trails and interpretive displays. It does not rule out having buildings to serve those purposes. And then something as large as Buford Park, you pretty much have to have a building for your tools or whatever. Regional parks like Alton Baker would be the place for large groups, facilities that they need, and revenue-generating events to quote-unquote enhance the city's economic vitality. That's a quote from the guide. Lane County Parks declared at their May 12th meeting that the North Bottomland and the Arboretum, by their decree, and those are my words, must be reclassified as regional, or parks would end the Arboretum's educational program and take out the native plant nursery. You can listen to the tape of the May 12th PAC meeting for confirmation. I already presented a rebuttal at the June 1st PAC meeting explaining the use of the definitions, which you will find in the first 40 pages of the guide. They are management tools. Any analysis of the need for various types of park must include all park property, no matter who owns it. There's no need to duplicate Alton Baker, and it should not be done if it's an analysis of county park property alone. And I was just this morning was going through the just posted Park and Open Space Master Plan. It just went up on the website on Friday, and was looking at the, is that my time?
Yeah, that's your time. You can okay. Kind of wrap up, so.
Oh, okay. So anyway, I was looking at it, and they are trying to justify their making the North Bottomlands a commercial event center by saying that the county has too much nature park and not enough regional park when they aren't counting all of the other places for large events that should have been included in the analysis. And the rest you can read, it's self-explanatory. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Jeff Mollers, followed by Webb Sussman.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Jeff Mollers. My partner is Kim Otoma. We were recently looking to purchase some land up in Oak Ridge, and we'd like to thank Commissioner Lycan and Stewart for helping us get the process jump-started. We wanted to just give an idea, knowing that it will come up for a vote at a later date, what our agenda is for the property, and hopefully allow you to have faces to go with the names you will see on paper in the future. The plot is roughly 8 acres in Oak Ridge, and what we are looking to do is to, on a threefold level, to create housing for workers, but also very nice housing and starter housing. The property is potentially able to be subdivided, which means we could put multiple houses on it, and we're looking for between the 500 and 600 square foot placement of homes for working professionals in the starting careers at a price point that's available. The average starting house in the community is around $200,000, and your average starting wage below $20 an hour is not able to adequately fill those payments, and that leaves a gap in there, and we're trying to fill that gap. The second fold process is then we would also have rentals for the young professional that is looking for a home, but not necessarily needing 1,700 to 2,000 square feet for one individual. And the third fold would be the property is large enough to put a small section together of rental cabins in the area up there. All we've seen is one hotel, and the hotel, in my personal opinion, is not adequate for the weekend person who's looking for, say, a retreat cabin for themselves and their wife while experiencing the tourism that is in the area. We have spoken with Luis Gomez, the city planner, and the gentleman was very excited about our proposal to him. And we tried to do our due diligence to make sure that our idea could proceed forward after the purchase of the land before we took up the Commission's time. In closing, I've gotten a chance to tell you everything I was hoping to today, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Sussman.
Good morning, Commissioners, Administrator. My name is Webb Sussman. I live in Eugene in Ward 1. And I'm here this morning in part because of the spectacular sunrise we had this morning. Most of the color added courtesy of the smoke from the many forest fires surrounding the area and burning in Lane County at the moment. There's been discussion recently at various levels concerning the acquisition of surplus military equipment. There's been a lot of publicity around the police use of surplus military equipment. However, there hasn't been a whole lot of discussion around fire and water use of surplus military equipment. I bring this up because I happened upon several articles concerning cities that are requiring surplus Air Force fuel tanker trucks, specifically Rampmaster 17s and Rampmaster 11s. Those Rampmaster 17s have a 17 kgal capacity. The Rampmaster 11s have a 6 kgal capacity. The advantage of the Rampmasters is they're on ruggedized chassis. They're completely self-contained in that they have their own pumping system as well as their own storage, and they're designed for forward basing. The Air Force uses them to fuel aircraft that are based at the front lines, and so they're designed to survive in extremely rugged circumstance. These things are being surplused off, and if you combine these with the portable water tanks the fire departments use, they could solve two problems. An immediate problem would be the firefighting issues that we see currently. They could move large volumes of water forward very quickly to attack grass fires and forest fires while they were smaller and more easily suppressed. But they would also solve an issue around water supply in the case of a seismic event, in that EWEB and SUB are both looking at portable water filtration trailers. And these things could go from the river to these dispersed water filtration trailers. I recognize the county doesn't have the revenue to actually go after these things itself. However, the county could support efforts by EWEB, by the regional fire agencies, by the cities of Eugene and Springfield to acquire these vehicles and have them available for use in the county in a case of an emergency, be it fire or seismic or some other catastrophe that required us to move water. That's the idea. Hopefully it'll be useful to you, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to address the board this morning? Seeing none, then we'll move on to Commissioner's response to public comments and/or other issues or remonstrance. Is there anyone that has any comments? Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeff, thank you. I can put the face to the who gave me the voice message? Oh, okay, perfect. I was hoping that you'd have a chance to really describe not only what you're trying to do in Oak Ridge, but your business in Springfield too. And I just want to say thank you very much for wanting to invest not only in Springfield, but I think throughout Lane County. So I really appreciate that very much. I think Commissioner Stewart really deserves a lot of the credit. He does the heavy lifting in East Lane. Thanks for the phone call. But I also want to give kudos to Howard Schussler as well. And I know got back to you on that and got the ball rolling. But thanks for coming this morning. Really appreciate it. And to Webb, I just wanted to say that I think from the county standpoint, what we can do a lot is advocate. This is probably more set up for either fire districts or obviously the state as well as the cities, but we can advocate. And one of the areas, in fact, at the AOC conference, we were really fortunate. One of our keynote speakers was Jeff Johnson, who's the retired fire chief from Tualatin Valley, and really one of the more respected fire chiefs throughout the country. And so he lives in Sisters now, so I think this is really something that we could potentially advocate. I think because your idea does resonate, and I really appreciate that very much. And Ellen, I thank you for your comments on the parks. I will make note that as you know, the PAC is working through a process. And I think at this point in time, it's going to be appropriate for us to allow the process to go through. But I appreciate you really being engaged and offering your thoughts as well. So thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Any other issues or remonstrance? I'd just like to acknowledge Webb's comments and inform you that West Lane Fire Protection Association picked up a surplus military tanker this year. In fact, I think Brian Weaver was the one that repainted it for him from olive drab to fire engine red. But they are being utilized in the area. So I do know that they do get picked up. And, the board does have opportunity through a granting process that actually our emergency manager helps put together an annual grant application to Homeland Security for various items, anything from interoperable radio systems to items like this that may be military surplus, and some of those grants are in combination with other cities, other agencies, and EWEB and everyone else could be involved in that process. So we're already working in a collaborative way with other agencies to obtain that surplus materials and monetary grants to upgrade our capacity to be resilient in an emergency. So thank you for bringing that to our attention as everybody's thinking about the New Yorker article and the fires around. I just ask the public, please be aware of your ignition sources right now. There's a complete ban in West Lane County of mowing, even on private property, and the forest has been completely shut down in Lane County as far as any commercial operations go. Something as simple as parking your car in tall grass can be that ignition source. So please be aware, and especially folks that are smokers out there, think about what you're doing, because we're stretched so thin right now. They're starting to call on National Guard units. We just don't have the ability to respond to a new fire. So with that, we'll move on to emergency business. Is there any emergency business today?
No.
Seeing none, then we'll move on to the consent calendar, which is routine items that are passed by the board in one motion with no discussion on the items. If folks want to see what these items are, they can go to our website on the agenda, and they can click on the view material and get the detailed information of each one of these consent calendar items. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Mr. Chair, I'd move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. So, moving on to county administration and announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Just one quick update. The Title II grant program applications are being allowed from August 10th to August 24th. We had a very short period of time, 2 weeks there, to submit. And so given that short period of time and our desire to seek as much funding from Title II as possible, our youth services, sheriff's office, and public works departments are all pursuing grants through the Title II program. We will not be able to bring forward to the board a request for approval to submit those grant applications prior to the due date of August 24th, which is next Monday, but we will, if we're successful in receiving those grants, do a retroactive action from the board. So I just want to make you aware of that process, and it's consistent, at least our pursuit of those grant funds is consistent with what we've done in the past. That's all I have right now, unless you have questions for me.
Any questions for the administrator? Well, we're running about 10 minutes ahead of schedule for our 9:30 time certain. And I wonder if we might be able to deal with the approving the performance auditor's strategic plan quickly, or is she's not in the room? Okay.
She's not here.
Okay.
I was thinking you could do 8B, which is the planning commission appointment under commissioner business.
That would work. Okay. So we're going to jump down to item 8B, which is the appointing one member to the Lane County Planning Commission, Order 1508-1813. And I think I'm going to let Commissioner Stewart and Commissioner Lyken address this item real quick, as they were on the subcommittee to interview potential applicants. So.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, both Commissioner Lyken and I, we interviewed 3 applicants. We actually had 4 applications, but one of the applications was didn't qualify due to location of where they live. We were looking, I believe, for an urban commissioner, and so we had, I think, well, I'll just state my opinion. We had 3 really good applicants with lots of varied experience. We had James Bouvard, who applied. That was had, I think it was 12 years of experience on the Planning Commission for Bonita. We also had, let me buzz through here, because Laura
Laura Potter.
Laura Potter, no, it wasn't, was it Potter?
Not Potter. Yeah, that's the last name.
Oh, and that's not.
Yeah.
Cooper.
Cooper, excuse me, Laura Cooper,
Chamber.
who had a considerable amount of experience and a background in law. And then our final applicant was Charles C.
Kaler.
Pardon? Oh, Kaler. And, we probably could have picked any of them. We are recommending to the board that Charles C. be appointed. Her background, she was a building official for many years. Most recently, she retired from the building department here in Eugene. And it's a private building official department, but I just really believe she would do a great job. Committed to being able to make all the meetings, fully understood the breadth of the amount of information that they might receive, and also really understands that it's what the law allows, and that's what the decision would, her decisions would be based on the law and applying the application criteria to approvals or recommendations. So, Commissioner Lykin?
I don't have anything more to add. I would just agree with Commissioner Stewart. Three really strong applicants, and it was actually a pretty challenging decision, but I think at this point in time we made the correct decision moving forward, at least today, and so I really appreciate all three wanting to step up. But all three would have been great on the planning commission. But I think at the end we both agreed that Charles C. was the right choice.
And I would say too that there's another round. I just got notice that they're posting for another position that's vacant. So I'm sure that those two have, if they want to apply again, they can be reconsidered for another position.
Excellent. So is there any questions for Commissioner Stewart or Commissioner Lykin?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Farr?
I believe you clarified it for me completely, that we do have another vacancy on the planning commission that we have advertised for, and that'll be filled in the next few weeks. A clarification on that, is that from West Lane County, the vacancy?
I don't know who.
I'm not sure. I couldn't tell which position it was.
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, we're unsure at this time because the notice that came to us yesterday by email did not state that.
Okay, okay, very good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So is there a motion to approve the board order? Commissioner Lykin?
Mr. Chair, I move approval of Order 15-08-18-13, the matter of appointing Charles C. Kaler to the Lane County Planning Commission.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. So with that, we are still about 4 minutes ahead of time, but I'm seeing just about everybody that is supposed to be here for the presentation here. So I am going to jump back to item 6B, which is Order 1508-1805, in the matter of approving the 2015 through 2017 Lane County Justice Reinvestment Grant Program budget and delegating authority to the Public Safety Coordinating Council Chair to sign and submit grant application, and to the county administrator to execute any additional grant documents, intergovernmental agreements, and contracts. And I think we've got Tim Lowy, the chair of the PSCC, Public Safety Coordinating Council, for those that aren't familiar with our acronyms, Paul Solomon, the vice chair of the Public Safety Coordinating Council, and we have the Honorable Deborah Vogt, who's the chair of the Budget Committee. And we also have Susan Sowards, who's the system analyst assigned by LCOG to the Public Safety Coordinating Council. So if you guys want to come on up and present the budget to us, and we'll be ready for action here.
Mr. Chair, a request, please.
Sure.
Will you ask that the speakers speak directly into the mic in order for my catching each word?
Great.
And welcome to Judge Bowles and Ms. Malawi and Mr. Solomon.
I will request that. So if you guys can make sure you're right up to the mics and speaking directly into them, because it's really difficult for Commissioner Farr to hear on. I've
Got it.
I've had to call it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't suppose that has anything to do with me. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for being here. We are here for the annual allocation, or the biannual allocation for the Community Corrections Fund, and this item is a grant application for House Bill 3194. I could go on in this, but what I want to do is introduce Judge Vogt and Paul Solomon, because they both served on the Budget Committee along with your Chair, Commissioner Bosevich, and the Sheriff's designee, and they got quite a bit of good work done, so I'll let them walk through it.
First, the updated budget documents, have you received those? There was a last-minute budget meeting yesterday. Did you receive the updated?
They were
all
just
the
handed out
commissioners?
to us.
Okay, excellent. So I just want to start off by...
I'll just make note to Commissioner Farr, it was just a minor $8,000 change.
And it was because of a carryover, that we got to actually allocate another $8,000 yesterday because of a carryover that we found out about last minute. So I just want to start out by saying that the Budget Committee for the PSCC is comprised of myself and Paul Solomon, along with Chief Deputy Fox from the Sheriff's Office and Commissioner Bosevich and Donovan Dumeier from Parole and Probation. I know that Commissioner Stewart has sat on the Budget Committee many times before, and we were really fortunate to have him, and we were very fortunate to have Commissioner Bosevich on it this time. The Budget Committee in the past has had some real struggles, frankly, and we're all aware of those struggles, and I'm really happy to report to the Commissioners that we didn't have those struggles this time. The biggest struggle that we had in the beginning was determining the actual amount of our allocation that we were going to get. The Budget Committee started off in the dark, and that was difficult for us to do. If you look in the packets that you were handed out on this item, the June 17th explanatory summary was what the Budget Committee came up with in the beginning, because we did not know our numbers, and we had to go through a three-tier analysis to figure out a recommendation. I can tell you that it was an interesting process in that we started off with this is how much we would like to get, this is how much we think we'll get, this is how much we hope we don't end up with. And we moved on from there. It was also kind of a different process for us, because when we ended up at the middle tier section where we thought we would end up, and we came very close to that, we as a group representing this broad range in public safety went around and just brainstormed out, what are we missing? What do we need? Where are the holes? And we hadn't really, in this process, fully explored that every single time, because we didn't have as much money to work with, and we were able to do that this time, which was a real benefit. We ended up a little more than the medium tier budget that was on the original explanatory summary that we gave you. And then we were able to add a few more things with the final explanatory summary of the budget that is dated July the 29th. I can tell you that this budget added some significant benefits to our community this time around. It filled some holes. We were able to shift money because of the Affordable Care Act and how it affected treatment slots. So that saved us money, and we were able to repurpose that into other treatment slots and housing and transitional housing. We were able, in this budget, which we didn't know we'd be able to do, we were able to continue some grants that would have been ending, which fund actual bodies in the district attorney's office, bodies in parole and probation. So we were able to expand this from the Budget Committee standpoint, expand it in a way that hit every area of public safety, from transitional housing to parole and probation to the Sheriff's Office to the DA's office to treatment services and housing. So I think it's a broad budget. The specifics, as I said, are in the explanatory summaries as far as the actual numbers and where the numbers fell. The only change in the budget that you're seeing before you today versus the one that you got in your packet is an $8,000 carryover that we found out about yesterday when we were budgeting the Measure 57 funds. And we added that to a grant that included sex offender treatment that needed to be bolstered more. And so that's where that $8,000 went. And I'm going to turn it over to Paul Solomon now about any specifics he wants to talk about.
Great. Thank you, Judge Vogt. Chair Bozovich, members of the board, thank you for having us today. A couple of points that I would like to make about this budget, and I think Judge Vogt did a good job of giving us a broad overview. One is that our 416 program is this new grant-funded program by the Criminal Justice Commission that is targeting property crime offenders and is paid for the better part of 2 positions in the DA's office. One of the things that we went out of our way to do was to bolster the funding for the DA's office. And in recent memory, this is the first time that I can recall that we've ever funded anything in the DA's office with community corrections. Well, it wasn't community corrections funding, it was the justice reinvestment funding. But one of our big concerns is the huge reduction in our CCA funding. As you may recall, as early as 4 years ago, Lane County represented about 10% of the total allocation that we received statewide. In the 13-15 session, that dropped to 9%. In this current budget cycle, it's dropped to 8%. So that 2% reduction represents a loss of over $4 million in community corrections funding. So we are hopeful that we are actually on the upswing and that moving forward, we'll actually see those numbers start to tick back up. We've also added a couple of parole officers for positions in the grant and a couple of parole officers that we needed to augment the PNP budget. There are a whole bunch of small pieces here, and if you have questions about any one of them, I would be happy, as I'm sure Judge Vogt would, to talk about any aspects of specific funding. The other thing that I would mention, and Judge Vogt touched on this, is we were able to sustain a number of federal grants. And historically, one of the challenges that we've had here in Lane County is that we have relied heavily on these grants to sustain our public safety programs because we haven't had the local funding to be able to do that. So the fact that we've been able to sustain in this budget a number of these grants that were going to go away, I think is a huge, huge asset for the public safety community moving forward. Finally, I would also note that the landscape is changing pretty dramatically as it relates to treatment and the Affordable Care Act. Judge Vogt touched on this, but we're still figuring out exactly what that looks like in terms of the impact on treatment slots, mental health services, but it has had a pretty profound impact on this budget as well, allowing us to repurpose a bit of money that was targeted for treatment slots that is now being subsidized through the Oregon Health Plan, Medicaid, Affordable Care Act. So, yeah, I think that's what I've got. Any questions?
Commissioner Sorensen.
First of all, thank you very much to all of you for your work on this, and I know that this is trying to put together a comprehensive approach, and it's important to have, as we see here today, people that have expertise and are in particular things, but also are looking across the fence and seeing what else it needs to be done. I was going to ask a question over the years that you have all made these presentations and been working on this, and that is there's increased experience and increased literature now out on the topic of the relationship between housing and getting people stabilized. And different communities around the country are doing more and more and more, and so I know this, you have in the materials that have just been handed out, you've got a section here on housing. I'm trying to find out where it is. Supervised housing, which is the supervised housing for male sex offenders, sponsors. You have that on there. You have transitional housing with the Oaks Capital Match, the Oaks Program Manager, Bothy College, 3 beds. So you're trying to do things where you're taking care of a basic human need, which is, we can have all the programs in medical and mental health and counseling, but if we don't have if they don't have a home, if they don't have a place to go, it's going to be harder and harder for them to focus on getting access to these programs. So my question is, with all of the work that's going on in housing, and in particular the HACSA and the Housing Policy Board and other efforts to focus on housing, could you, any one of the 4 of you, describe what interaction you've had with HACSA, because they are the federally funded housing agency that deals with poor people who need housing. They're not the only one. There's others, but they are the largest. And I'm just curious what their involvement is, and whether or not there are some models out there beyond Eugene and Springfield and Lane County that are involved the federally funded housing agency in the criminal justice system in the effort to try to do something about the victimization of people and the continued recidivism of people that have committed crimes and might commit them again.
I think that you should take that.
We all agree Paul should take it. So
even agree
that was
with
a long question, Commissioner Sorensen.
Yeah.
I will do my darndest to answer all of your points. What I would say is we have worked diligently with HACSA for over 20 years and partnered with them for just about every single major housing project that we have. The most recent one was Bothy Cottage, which is our program for women with children who are reentering the community. We are on track to break ground on the Oaks, which, as you know, we received a $9 million allocation in low-income housing tax credits. And these projects really would not take place without the expertise of the staff at HACSA to manage a tax credit project. Nonprofits like sponsors don't have the in-house talent to really go after that type of funding. They're very complicated financial tools. As a result, I do think that we have developed a model, and in fact, we have been talking to counties around the state, acting as a developer or technical consultant. In fact, Marion County right now is trying to replicate our Roosevelt housing project. So we've been working with the Sheriff's Office in Marion County, the Parole and Probation Department, which is in the Sheriff's Office, and their housing authority to try and develop a similar project. I think one of the things that we've done is developed a model that can be replicated. A lot of people think of housing authorities and recognize that they have a lot of restrictions. Sex offenders can't live there in Section 8 housing, but a lot of housing authorities do have a lot of latitude in who they do allow to live there. So it really varies outside of the federal laws from each jurisdiction in terms of what they can do with this population. And what I would also say is the Oregon Housing and Community Services, the state agency that allocates the tax credits, is currently going through their strategic planning process. Mayor Piercy and myself both serve on an advisory committee, and next week Chris Hoy, the Community Corrections Director from Clackamas County, and myself are going to give a presentation to the committee on serving people with criminal histories. in public housing. There's a huge interest by OHCS to increase the profile of housing projects in the state that serve this population. And in fact, during this last round of funding for tax credits, it was a priority consideration. And the Elks Project was the only one in the state that targeted that population. So, did I answer most of the question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's good.
Commissioner Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, PSCC staff, or Chair, Vice Chair, Judge Vogt, thank you. It must be nice. I remember being on that committee, and it seemed like all we did is cut programs or reduce service and have little bits and pieces of money left over to try to allocate to something that was important. So it's great to hear that there's actually some resources that you were able to target the needs. That's what we need to be doing. I was curious that when I was transitioning off, the Justice Reinvestment grant program was just kind of coming in. The first 2 years was really kind of go ahead, we'll continue to fund the current programs. I was just curious as to, now that we're into the second year of that cycle, are you seeing more the grants starting to now be applied to proven programs, or are they trying to move you towards different programs in our provision of services? Just curious as to how that money's looked at instead of, I'm sure, just a big check being given.
It did make some changes, and we have the grant application going in, which has changed extensively. We also, as part of the change, we looked at some of the numbers, and we're going in the right direction in Lane County from where we started with the initial Justice Reinvestment. And so a couple of the main changes that will be sort of interesting now is the 10% to victim services, which we didn't really mention. 10% of Justice Reinvestment now goes directly to community-based victim services programs, and so we were able to make that allocation as well and reach out into that community, which we hadn't been able to do before. Also, they're doing a the RCT.
Randomized control trial.
And so that will be interesting in the 416 program. We're allocating, we have to do a randomized control trial to see how this is working now, and we are putting that money with the 416 program so that we'll be able to make sure that that program is getting the numbers even farther in the right direction. So they've added some components to the grant program, and actually we're trying to get to the point where we get our grant application in for all the funding early, because we're the first, I would say we're the largest county that's putting in the grant first this year. So I don't know if that answered all the questions, but the numbers are going in the right direction, and they are giving us some more funneling, but it's also funneling outside of the original parameters with the victim services and the testing ourselves.
I would add too that Susan has done a phenomenal job of putting this together really in a very short timeline to get this in for the early submission. But every single one of these components of this application is being framed and evaluated based on a number of criteria, including our ability to reduce our dependence on prison beds and reduce recidivism, and also the methods that we are doing that using evidence-based practices that can be evaluated. So there's a lot more emphasis on ensuring that this funding is being spent on programs that are evidence-based and that can demonstrate either a reduction in our prison usage or recidivism.
And one of the things that we're doing to make sure that we're getting all that information and that we're recommending the right programs is we're having those programs now give us that data so that we can test it.
But the last comment I would make is usually when we bring the community corrections plan forward, it's either in October, November, or December. This time it is in August, because the grant application for the early allocation of 3194 is due tomorrow?
Yes.
Is due tomorrow. And as you mentioned, Commissioner, it's entirely different than it was the first time. This time, this is the first time the Criminal Justice Commission has set out a grant application with requirements, with addressing evidence-based practices and trying to keep people in local control in the community as opposed to sending them to Salem to state prison. So it's been a pretty effective work effort by all parties concerned to try and get the application in by tomorrow, which I think we'll make, and to finish up the Community Corrections Act and the 3194 allocation to bring it to you now.
Right. And I wanted to say Paul, you touched on it, I wanted to say thank you for pointing out and the recommendation in the budget to spend some money in the district attorney's office. As was reported in the report, it looks like because of the cuts we've experienced over the years, and now it's catching up with us, it looked like, if I remember correctly, almost $3 million that we didn't see because of the reduction of our ability to actually deal with folks with felonies and that. So I appreciate that we're trying. We didn't do any of that on purpose. So, like I said, in our budget process, cutting, and we just didn't have the resources to do it. So I'm glad, hopefully, we can start to see that come up. And my final question is mental health was something that kind of stuck with me in the past. I noticed that the numbers that I can remember were virtually zero in mental health because we couldn't find providers. So it's nice to see there's some budget allocation to there. The question I have is there's a couple of items here that have, to be announced, to be determined. Hopefully we're not going to have any trouble finding providers to be able to allocate that resources to, right?
We're working on the mental health allocation through the jail and Captain Buchwald and the new provider there. That's our first stop where we had talked to them. It wasn't being utilized when we had it through emergence, and so that's why we're pulling it back so that we can make sure that it gets utilized.
Okay, great. Because
it basically would pay for a prescriber, which is the main gap we've got out there. As people get out of prison, DOC is no longer responsible for them.
Right.
They have 30 days or 60 or whatever they've got of their medication, and then you can't find anybody in the community to prescribe them the drugs they need to keep their mental health stable.
Sounds like it's still an issue. That was what I was trying to understand. Was a couple of years ago, we just had difficulty actually finding providers that we could get service from.
And that challenge is still there.
I would also add that we have made some early inroads into reestablishing our relationship with Lane County Behavioral Health and looking at ways that we can get clients served there under specific conditions that allow everybody to feel good about the safety and security of the services that are being provided there with the population that we're sending them. So my hope is over the course of the next year that we'll actually start to see those numbers increase slightly.
Great. Thank you.
And one last thing is we, at the last PSCC meeting, adopted a mental health plan from the Mental Health Department that looks at the interaction between criminal justice and mental health, and that's coming to the Board of Commissioners very soon. I think they wanted to do some more work on it from the county administrators and before it comes to you. But it looks at the interplay between criminal justice and mental health, which is significant due to cuts that have gone on for decades. So.
Thank you.
So I'll just remind people one more time to really eat the mic so Commissioner Farr can hear you on the phone, because if you're not coming through really clear on these speakers, it's not getting through the speakerphone. So, yeah, I know it's a little uncomfortable sometimes to feel like, you're doing the comedian routine where they get right up to the mic, and but you need to. I do also want to just express my amazement that Susan's here and standing after the short deadlines that the state gave us to put this grant application together, and the fact that the rules weren't completely written and are still being written as we're trying to put it in, and she's having to coordinate with, I mean, if you look at the list of agencies involved here, each one of those agencies has to supply their information to go into this grant, and I really appreciate the work you're doing putting that together. It's yeoman's work, and I don't think you had a day off in the last 2 weeks, probably, putting that together, so I really appreciate your work on that. I also want to recognize that Sheriff Trapp and Chief Deputy Fox snuck in the back of the room, and Chief Deputy was also on the Budget Committee, so if anyone has any questions about that side, they're available for answers. And I just, I'm glad that Commissioner Stewart brought up the accountability portions and changes in this program. It's really well built into the system now that outcomes are being evaluated and performance of programs and whether or not they're actually doing what they're supposed to do, because the whole point of the Justice Reinvestment Program was to reduce prison use. And part of what the state's really requiring in this set of the grant that's different from last biennium is you got to show us. Show me the numbers, and then we'll give you the money. So that's part of what we're looking at here. What's also great is he also brought up some of the mental health issues. The Justice Reinvestment Program, the Community Corrections Act, and our Measure 57 money, this is really where we get into restorative justice in our justice system. This is the piece of Lane County's justice system that isn't about making an arrest, prosecuting somebody, or just incarcerating them. This is about rehabilitation and reducing recidivism and making these people productive citizens. And there is so much tied into these grants. Drug and alcohol treatment, the cognitive therapy that has transition. That's what was really interesting sitting in the Budget Committee, listening to how these programs transition from somebody that gets their initial assessment in the jail at intake and how that person's handed over to the nonprofit agency or some other department as they're departing the jail and released, and the warm handoffs they're planning and everything else that are under these grants. And in these grant programs, the diversion programs, where we're actually, one of the reasons why we're funding DA staff is so that we can charge people with the lesser crimes that are eligible for diversion programs that we currently aren't doing. You can't divert somebody that's done a person crime necessarily into a drug and alcohol issue. They have to be charged with a behavioral crime that's eligible for these diversion programs, but we haven't had the DA staff to do that. So having that's why the DA got brought into some of these grants. So I was really pleased to sit on the Budget Committee. I'm really impressed with the work they're doing, and I'm really pleased to see this program go through. I only wish that the legislature had invested the full amount of the savings they're getting from the prison construction avoidance. That's the only thing that was disappointing. I really appreciate the fact that they went on the high end of the Community Corrections Act. When it comes to the 3194 funding, they really did about half. Because what people don't understand is they wrapped in $5 million of another set of funding under House Bill 5008. And by the time you subtract that out and subtract what they also set aside for the administrative cost, it was really about half of what they're expecting to save this biennium in construction costs. And if they had allocated the full amount, we would have been robustly funding all these, restorative justice programs, all these diversion programs, all these mental health programs. Instead, we got a few extra 100,000 we were able to reallocate. And we, get a couple new DA positions. We might, a couple, parole and probation. We're able to put money into emergency housing, and give, one of the things that's buried in this budget is just money for first and last month's rent to allocate to people to get them into housing and all that, which Commissioner Sorensen addressed. But boy, what we could have done with about, another 75% more money if they had done the full 60 million that was originally promised in the governor's budget, and as part of the original promise of us agreeing back a couple sessions ago to House Bill 3194 that full amount of those avoided prison costs would be reinvested in these grants. and the state has not been investing that fully. Not to mention the fact that we've lost that percentage, that 10% that went down to 9% and now 8%, and the monies we lost there. So between those two things, we could have really, if we were at 10% and we got the full funding from the state, we really would have been just almost having to ask people what else we could spend the money on. Instead, we got a little extra allocation, which I really appreciate, because these are critical programs, and programs the community's been asking about. There's been a lot in the news about mental health and the criminal justice system, and this is where it gets addressed, is under these programs. So I really appreciate the work of the PSCC. I appreciate the work of Susan and getting these applications together. Commissioner Lykin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I also want to just say thank you very much for the good work on this. Really appreciate it. I do have a couple questions, and maybe the first question is for Judge Vogt, and that is your thoughts on how the Springfield Jail relates into all of this. And it's for municipal offenders. I don't know if there's a sharing going on or not between, like, if there's something happening between Lane County, the city of Eugene, where you don't have to tie up somebody in Lane County Jail, say, for 10 days, but instead, is there any sort of, and I'm not suggesting there's a contract or anything else, or is there anything that's happening there?
Well, it actually probably would be a better answered by your chief deputy and the sheriff that's sitting in the back, because they have to make those arrangements. I know that there are some of those arrangements going on. I don't know the extent of them, and I do think that Deputy Fox may know.
You'll need to come up, Greg.
Yeah. Hey, you need to use a microphone for Commissioner Farr here, and don't forget to eat the mic.
And while you're answering that question, the other question I had, and for you to think about as this question, and this relates to 2017, and I'm curious if Tim and Paul are going to resign from the Budget Committee then, leading into 2017, because this will probably go down as one of the biggest, we'll spend now and figure out how to pay for it later legislative sessions maybe I've seen. And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are going into this, especially, we just had this, we talked about Medicaid, and really what's happened here. And the system could very well be broke by the time there's going to be a huge hole. So I'll just have you think about that as Chief Deputy answers the question, just based on the Springfield Jail, and what the arrangements are there, I guess, from that perspective.
So the only actual agreement that we have with Springfield is that we take their female municipal inmates. We have a contract for 5, and then in trade, we give them 5 sentenced county offenders. There's some anecdotal improvement in system-wide, certainly, because there are a bunch of offenders sitting over in Springfield Jail that otherwise might be free. But as far as stats related to that, we don't really keep those. So it's just the 5 for 5 trade is really the only agreement that we have with them.
That answers my question. Thank you. Thank you very much. So 2017, who wants to deal with that one? Because it's kind of a monster in a sense.
Well, I guess I would love to resign and retire, but I don't see that in my future anytime soon, like some of my compatriots. So I suspect I'll be here for a while. But as it relates to the budget moving forward, I guess one of my comments, and this is kind of a segue to Chair Bozovich's comment about holding the legislature's feet to the fire around the promises that they make. And there were many of us who spent quite a bit of time in Salem this session urging our legislators to ensure fully funding of 3194. And I think at the end of the day, it became pretty clear that there were really just a handful of people that were making those decisions, and it really boiled down to the co-chairs of Ways and Means. Fortunately, they were able to make some modest increases that got us to, I think, a place that I would consider a bare minimum level, given the amount of savings that have been achieved. I think the challenge moving forward, Commissioner Lycan, is to ensure that the savings that we achieve in this coming biennium is realized in the 17-19 allocation. So I think our job starts today in reminding our elected officials of the work that we're doing, the money we're saving the state, and ensuring that that money comes back to Lane County.
It's difficult. You're not able to see the future. As far as resigning from the Budget Committee, I'm not on the Budget Committee, so I don't have to resign. But it's difficult. But I think the point to be made as far as community services, community health, and criminal justice and public safety is concerned, at least as far as 3194 is, the whole point about this was not just savings on construction costs for new prisons, but savings also on operations costs for new prisons on an ongoing basis. And the estimate was from the governor's office when the initial budget was presented was that it would be $60 million in this biennium. It came down from there. But the truth of the matter is, if we don't flatten and decrease the curve in growth to prison beds to the state system, they will pay that money anyway. And they will pay it in a way that is not as effective as at local control and dealing with these people before they get hardened and are serving a long-term time in prison. So it's difficult. I don't have any projections on 17. You're right. The state is facing significant problems with PERS and the Oregon Health Plan. But as far as the community services are involved, if we are saving money, we need to be able to reinvest that money in the programs that we have here that try and address some of the source issues that send people to prison.
Judge Vogt, any additional comments?
You know, I'll just say that I've been at Budget Committee meetings like we could see in 17. And the slashing, frankly, that occurs, it's not 2 steps forward, 1 step back then. We've come 10 steps forward and we'll go 12 back.
Yeah.
And that's my concern. And that's what they need to understand. We cannot keep progressing in right down to the individual people that we're helping, that we're finding housing for, that we're getting into mental health, and we're having folks progress to the point where the recidivism is down and the prison population is down, and we're doing everything we're supposed to 10 steps ahead, and then have the carpet ripped out from under all of it and go 12 steps back. And that's my real concern for 17. I've been in meetings not quite that bad, and I hope that we don't have to have that.
One last follow-up, Mr. Chair. So this question may be for Tim, and because, Tim, I know that you've had what I would call a extensive and successful private sector background. And so your thoughts on, because there's also this thought that if Oregon moved forward on what we would call a vibrant economy, say a 3% growth for the next X years, your thoughts, and I know you don't probably have these numbers in front of you, but as a numbers guy that you have been over the years, your thoughts on if Oregon was able to sustain a certain amount of economic growth, would this be an opportunity then to maybe, in a sense, help pay for what's coming before us? I mean, I guess the question really is a strong economic growth and vibrant economy going to obviously sustain and help as we move forward?
As far as the state is concerned,
Yes.
as far as state revenue is concerned?
Yes.
Well, certainly. To the extent that the state is almost solely based on income tax, to the extent that people's incomes are going up and they're taxed, I won't say completely at a flat rate, but it's essentially 9% for most people in the middle class, a growing economy definitely helps the state revenue circumstance, but there's also the business cycle. So 3% growth 10 years ago would not have been considered robust. It would have been considered, a decent level of growth. After coming out of the 80s recession, we had a growth rate of just over 2% for almost a decade. I think the growth rates now are somewhere around the range of 2 to 3%, and certainly unemployment's going down. But for my money, on some level, the state has to look at tax reform, however that is addressed, because you cannot be you cannot have your budget predicated on this cycle of up and down and up and down. It's, as the judge said, it's just too stressful. And once you lose these programs, rebuilding the programs is much, much harder. And once you lose the cooperation and collaboration that we see evidenced by the Budget Committee, getting that done again, when people, I've said it before, when you're fighting over dregs, whatever you end up with is dregs. So you have to be able to invest. Obviously, we'd like community corrections funds to go down, not because we're not prosecuting people, but because we don't have people coming back into the community, because we are reducing crime, because we are reducing recidivism. But you have to find a way to sustainably fund that. And I think we thought with 3194, because we were saving the state money, that would help. But certainly, a good economy is better than a bad economy, as far as state revenue is concerned, and also as far as people working in the community is concerned. Yeah.
You know, nice to slow the growth from Oregon to Vancouver and Camas and Provo and Boise. So, yeah, appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Sorensen.
I wanted to ask you another more big picture question. Obviously, there's federal money involved in this, there's state money involved in this, there's local money involved in this. One of the big issues that we're going to be talking about here on our board, and I hope you'll be talking about it as well, is the timing and the structure of the next ballot measure when we go out to the voters again. And by that I'm referring to the 5-year jail and youth services levy that voters approved. It is a 5-year levy, so it does go out of existence. The general perspective, I think, up here is that it's easier to renew a measure than to make up a new one. We've had some recent bad results with the public opinion analysis on another matter. I was just at the Association of Oregon Counties summer conference and was at a breakout session with other commissioners to talk about the sad state of the May 2015 election that just took place, where commissioners from other counties were asking for different types of public funding, mostly in the either jail or public safety or law enforcement area. So, you know, one idea is we deal with this DA thing. By that I mean failure to prosecute means less state dollars. So our investment in DA, or I should say our disinvestment in DA, has resulted in less state money coming back. So one idea is, well, maybe put more local money into it, thereby getting more match. But that involves changing the ballot measure, which violates what might be called a cardinal rule, which is you can get ballot measures renewed easier than you can get them changed. So any thoughts on either the timing of when we would ask the voters for the renewal, or if there's any additional thoughts on recalibrating, changing, because as you know, the current measure provides zero funding for DA, and it does provide, of course, substantial money for the jail and youth services. So, curious what your thoughts are. 4 down to 0 or 4 down to 1 here. What your perspective is on that?
I can give you my personal opinion, and that's all I can give you on this.
That's all I want. I don't want an official opinion from anybody.
All right. My personal opinion on this, in terms of the last thing that you said, as far as the district attorney is concerned, is I think we've made some progress, albeit slow, in adding additional resources to the to the district attorney's office. I think we're hoping to get, when all is said and done with 416 and the community prosecution, 1 to 1.5 DAs out of that, which is a significant difference. But as I said, after the last measure passed, my number one priority in the terms of trying to find additional funds was finding additional funds for the district attorney's office for a variety of reasons, not just the match, but the ability to intervene with people early before they get into a pattern of habitual offense, so that you can divert them early as opposed to having to deal with them later, particularly coming out of the state system. I think we've made some progress on that. To your first point about renewing the serial levy, nobody likes running ongoing operations on funding with a sunset. But in a storm, you do what you need to do in a storm, which is what the commissioners did. I think, from my read of this, the public understands and appreciates that with that levy, you did exactly what you said you would do. You allocated the funds to the jail to keep people who were getting out of jail early, who needed to be in jail, A, for a timeout, and B, because they represented a threat to the community. They are no longer getting out. We don't have any Measure 11 offenders who are mandated by state law to stay in jail pre-trial, getting out because of overcrowding. So I would be optimistic about renewing that levy. It will be a decision that you have to make in the terms of discussions that you have with the community if you want to add additional funds through the district attorney in that regard. I think additional funds are necessary, but to the extent that we can continually to incrementally grow 1, 2, or 3 DAs over the next few years, I'm not sure you need to make a change in the levy itself or possibly consider a separate levy for the district attorney's office.
I don't know that I have a whole lot to add. I would probably concur with most of what Tim said. I think that it would be a challenge I think that members of the public might see it as breaking faith by adding additional elements to the package at this point. I think it was an amazing feat that we were able to pull it off, and I give the sheriff's office and our electeds a lot of credit for doing the hard work to make that possible. But if it was me, I would probably keep it just the way it is and look for other ways to raise funding for the DA's office. I recognize, I'm very aware of the impact that each DA has on our ability to prosecute, particularly those property crimes. And just to elaborate a little bit more, Tim and I sit on the Regional Implementation Committee for House Bill 3194, so we evaluate the data and how the counties are performing. And one metric that's been measured is the length of stay for property crimes coming out of Lane County. And at one point, I think it was last quarter, our average length of stay for ID theft was over 40 months, which was double the length of stay for the other big 5 counties. No one else was even close. And a lot of that has to do with the inability of the district attorney's office to file on these cases the first time they pop up. So they wind up committing multiple counts, and we send them to prison for a longer period of time, having missed the opportunity to provide an intervention. So I am very supportive of these interventions like 416. I think hopefully that's a tool that we can actually build on and sustain through 3194 funding or other resources, and look at other strategies like that to augment the DA's office.
I don't have anything to add. It's another crystal ball moment, right? Unfortunately, and it's the position that Lane County finds itself in. I can tell you that the levy and what it's done just on a day-to-day basis from my shop it's a huge change. We have people that are getting held in the jail, even we can quick set them and get them, I can hold them for 2 days so that I can get them with their lawyer long enough and sober enough to make a decision to break that cycle right then. And so it's made a huge day-to-day impact on our work.
Any perspective, Susan?
Nothing to add, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Don't renew it.
Yeah, I think we're drifting away from the actual item before the board here, which is the actual Justice Reinvestment Grant Program budget and delegating the authority to apply for the grant. So are there any further questions about the actual 3194 Justice Reinvestment Grant Program and application and the budget? Then I'll entertain a motion. Commissioner Stewart.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval of Order 15-08-18-05.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Then we will, if you all will stay there, we'll move on to Order 1508-1806, which is in the matter of approving the 2015-2017 Lane County Community Corrections Plan and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute grant documents, intergovernmental agreements, and contracts. And I will turn it over to Tim and Paul and Judge Vogt and Susan again.
I'm not sure we have much to add to this. You probably noticed that looking at the budget documents themselves, these are bound kind of at the hip between the systems, and I think we've talked about it, but I'll give Paul and the judge a chance if they want to talk about the community corrections plan.
You know, it is, they're intertwined so much, and really what we did in the structure was we looked at all of it as a whole to make sure that we were able to fill every hole that we could, regardless of what column it was in. And so I don't have anything to add.
I would share 2 points. One is we were incredibly fortunate that given the fact that we went from 9% to 8%, that our CCA allocation wasn't reduced dramatically. And part of that has to do with the fact that the legislature chose to fund the CCA at the highest level, the highest range. So it really saved us from what probably would have been $1 million+ reduction. So that was very fortunate. Secondly, we went back and forth in looking at what were the programs that were absolutely vital but didn't fit the mold of justice reinvestment, so that we wouldn't be able to provide the same type of metrics around decreasing prison beds or recidivism and evidence-based practices, but made sure that we were putting the right funding in the right category. So we really, it was a jigsaw puzzle. It was by far the most complicated budget that we've ever participated in putting together. But at the end of the day, I think that despite the complexity, we've done a good job of covering all our bases and ensuring that those vital programs that we need are funded. Including, there was, and Chair Bozovich mentioned, House Bill 5008, which allocated $5 million to the jails when this legislation was first passed in 1315. The legislature, in their infinite wisdom, decided to pull that $5 million, which basically means either the jail loses that money or we find it in the existing allocation. And given the fact that the sheriff's office, when that money came up in the last session, they went ahead and reduced their CCA allocation by that amount. So it was really important that we made sure that that was held whole as well within the grant and aid funding.
I just have one more comment, sort of a closing comment on this. As you know, I have been involved with the Coordinating Council for, some would say, too long. Particularly, I think my wife would say too long. But as Paul said, this is the most complex budget process that we've gone through. They've all been complex. As those of you that have served on the Coordinating Council or paid close attention to it, you know, this is a very fluid, complicated system when you try and bring nonprofit agencies, social service agencies, parole, probation, the sheriff's office in the terms of corrections, health and human services together, and all work together to try and address what are some pretty critical issues for our community. I have to say that this has been the best process that I have seen as long as I've been involved in that, and that goes back almost 20 years. This, I think, better reflects the vision of what the coordinating council was supposed to do about intergovernmental, interagency, community cooperation and collaboration around critical issues to the community, including mental health, including housing, including public safety, including corrections than I've seen so far. And I'm very proud to say that I just got to sit back and watch it happen.
To that end, I would really like to give Judge Vogt and Commissioner Bozovich, two individuals who really don't have any horses in the race other than wanting to see a process that's fair and transparent take place for their roles, because I think leadership from both of you has really helped us produce what I think is a quality product. And Susan's wonderful work actually putting it all together.
So, any questions about the community corrections plan or the budget? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval of Order 15-8-18-06 in the matter of approving the 2015 through 17 Lane County Community Corrections Plan and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the grant documents, intergovernmental agreements, and contracts.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And moving on in county administration to item 6D, which is Order 1508-1807, in the matter of approving the county performance auditor's one-page strategic plan. And we should bring up Ms. Miller, and I will turn things over to her once she gets settled here. And I just want to make sure the public's aware that Commissioner Farr is attending by phone, who is the chair of our temporary audit committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I ask you again if Ms. Miller, when she approaches the mic, to lean into it and speak clearly?
She heard you.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Chair Bozovich. Good morning. Good morning, Commissioners. Commissioner Farr, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you clearly. Thank you, Sandra.
As stated, I'm here to present on the County Performance Auditor's one-page strategic plan. The strategic plan's mission, vision, and objectives were designed to provide foundation and guidance for the performance audit function through 2017. The strategic plan is aligned with Lane County's 2014-2017 strategic plan and includes the county's vision and values. The strategic plan states the county's performance auditor's mission is to improve the performance, accountability, and transparency of Lane County government, and the vision is to provide relevant, timely analysis and information so the county can continuously improve its services and build public trust. There are 3 areas of focus: improved service and performance, responsible management, and public agent. The strategies under improved service and performance area of focus include identifying high-risk and high-impact audit topics, as well as topics aligned with the county's strategic areas of focus. Strategies for the responsible management area of focus include managing and holding the performance audit function to the same standards that other county programs would be audited against, as well as working with county management to improve their processes and strengthen internal controls. The public agent area of focus is just that, being an agent of the public and sharing with Lane County residents the results of efforts to improve county government. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Miller?
Mr. Chair, if I may step into the queue.
Go ahead, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. Ms. Miller, thank you for your hard work in bringing this strategic plan before the board. I'd like to point out that the temporary internal audit committee, as the committee is named, has worked very closely with Ms. Miller in developing the plan. And one of the main focuses of the plan, or the discussion that we had surrounding the plan, was to make certain that the auditor's office plan matched very closely with the adopted Lane County strategic plan. And I would like to report that Ms. Miller has taken great diligence in making certain that did occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr. Any other further questions for Ms. Miller or comments? Commissioner Sorensen.
I just wanted to thank you and all the people involved with the effort to put together this plan and get more information out to the public and out to the employees about what you're doing and the importance of it. And maybe you could take just a minute to talk about that hotline that you've been working on.
Oh, sure. Chair Bozovich, Commissioner Sorensen, actually, the next item is to approve my work plan for fiscal year 15-16, and part of that is a project to implement the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. I've been focused on risk assessment during the spring, and so I've put on hold implementing the hotline, but the purpose is really to provide a means for employees to report any fraud, waste, or abuse that's happening, and it's intended to be anonymous, so maybe they would be more forthcoming if...
Mr. Chair, a little more directly into the mic from Ms. Miller, please.
Jared.
So that was basically it.
What's the timeline for getting that hotline going?
My plan is to have it implemented by October.
Thanks.
Any other further discussion or questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
All right, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner
I'd
Stewart.
like to move approval of Order 15-08-18-07 in the matter of approving the County Performance Auditor's one-page strategic plan.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to item E, which is Order 1508-1808, in the matter of approving the County Performance Auditor's fiscal year 2015-16 work plan. And again, we have Shonda Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to share a little bit about the process that went into developing the work plan. To identify potential audit topics, I conducted a county-wide risk assessment. During the risk assessment, I evaluated the inherent risk of key programs, and inherent risk is risk that naturally exists absent any management controls. I also identified other risks that could impact the ability of programs to meet their goals and objectives. Using the results of the risk assessment, I identified 7 potential audit topics and narrowed those down to 2 audit topics that I included in this proposed fiscal year 15-16 work plan. Also included in the proposed work plan are 2 administrative projects related to forming the performance audit function. One, which we just talked about, is implementing the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. And the second one is developing policies and procedures around the performance audit function. On July 28th, the temporary internal audit committee met and approved a motion to recommend to the board approval of the proposed fiscal year 2015-16 work plan. If I may, I'd like to provide a brief overview of the two performance audit topics. The first one is financial indicators. Auditors from the City of Portland and Multnomah County and cities and counties across the U.S. have recently been reviewing the financial health of their governments using financial indicators and trends. Similarly, this audit project will identify both favorable and unfavorable indicators and trends and assess the financial health of Lane County. The second proposed audit topic is behavioral health. Behavioral health had the highest inherent risk score based on the risk assessment results, and this is partly due to the high degree of change within the program, including healthcare transformation changes and Affordable Care Act changes. It's important to note the Department of Health and Human Services is aware of the risks and is in the process of implementing changes, including a new model of delivering behavioral health services. In addition, in talking with managers at Health and Human Services, the Sheriff's Office, and others, I gained a clear understanding of the risks and impacts to public safety that individuals with behavioral health issues pose. And I found this to be a system-wide issue facing the county. Just as the last agenda item discussed. And if I may, I believe Sheriff Trapp is here, and he can best speak to those risks.
Welcome, Sheriff.
Thank you. I just had a couple of comments on this, and I thank Ms. Miller for bringing this topic forward. Currently, about 40% of our inmates in our county jail, it's about 140 of the 351 inmates, are diagnosed mentally ill. That number is probably higher. That survey, I think, has some age to it. I was just speaking yesterday with the sheriff of Marion County. He has just refreshed the survey of his jail. His jail currently holds 52% of its population is diagnosed mentally ill. This is probably, well, not probably, this is the most inhumane way of managing folks with mental illness. They don't receive any substantial treatment in jail. They're stabilized and managed. It's also the most expensive way, in my view, to manage them. And if we could get folks into appropriate management and treatment and out of the jail, it would have a huge impact on relieving our stressed status of minimal jail beds. We're also seeing a very visible increase in the non-criminal police custody incidents in our patrol force, responding to those in some level of mental health crisis. This requires much more staff time to be engaged in ongoing engagements in volatile circumstances. The reality, and we've seen it locally here, we are playing against the odds. And more tragic events are going to occur until we find a way to address this very important problem. A behavioral health audit is the first step in determining our path forward. And I very much thank Ms. Miller for identifying this as a priority for her office.
Thank you. Any further?
Yes, I just wanted to mention that during the course of the year, if any unforeseen risks or issues arise warranting additions or changes to the work plan, I will work with the audit committee to bring a work plan addendum to the board. And I will provide a status update on the work plan at least once a quarter. Thank you.
Excellent. Commissioner Lyken?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Shonda, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. The one thing I will say is you know, you will notice when someone is very passionate about the work that they're doing, and Shonda is, and it actually rubs off, I think, on the committee, and I want to say thank you very much for that. Not only really your professionalism, but I think really what you bring as our auditor, and I want to say thank you to that. I think at our last meeting, what we found was when we went through the risk assessment, I really appreciate what you're going to focus on this year. And through that conversation, it really was a conversation that was happening between Health and Human Services and the Sheriff's Department. And really, I think you just heard the comments from Sheriff Trapp. That really resonated with us, I think, during our meeting. So, Shonda, to you, I just want to say thank you very much for the work that you're doing and will continue to do for Lane County. I think you've done an extraordinary job. Looks like we lost Commissioner Farr, but I just also want to say thank you to Commissioner Farr, who chairs the temporary committee, does a nice job. I think you have was it a standing meeting or that you meet with Commissioner Farr before our committee, and I really want to say thanks because the agenda is very simplified and it just flows very well. But it's very obvious that we have somebody as our auditor who's very passionate about the work she does, and I will tell you, it truly resonates, and it resonates, I think, with the entire committee. So nice job on this. I think what you have put together and what the committee approved, and obviously needs to be approved by this board, was something that I think makes sense, and it's step by step. And I really, I think the focus on the behavioral health issue was very significant for us, and also obviously the financial indicators. But nice work on this all the way through, and good work through the committee as well. But just wanted to make those comments. Being a part of the committee has been really a really opportunity. If you've ever been involved in working with auditors, sometimes it can be a little bit dry. But I will say that this committee is really it starts from Shonda, and I think the committee really just works their way through this on the agenda. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stewart.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I too want to thank Shonda for the great work, the work plans this morning. I also wanted to thank you for your once-a-month regular meeting to kind of keep me up to date about the plans, and I didn't really have any questions of you today because of the briefings that I get, but I really appreciate it. Also, she's, I think, going to attempt to go down to Cottage Grove and be on the radio station and do some public outreach, so I appreciate that. Sheriff, I know that you're sitting down, but I wanted to ask you, when I first was elected, it seems to me like one of the items that we very first did in the jail was cut the ribbon for the Sherman Center. And wasn't that specifically geared towards mental health provision? And if it was, I was curious as we're maybe trying to tackle this. I know resources is the ultimate key to dealing with this, but with Affordable Care Act and with some of the other things that are taking place, maybe a financial model could be made to reopen it if that wasn't that intended to serve?
It was, yeah. Richard Sherman was a longtime mental health employee of the jail, and it was named in his honor, and it was, in fact, to continue to focus efforts on that part of our custody. Today, the facility's still there. Today, it's used as our education, work release, sit-in program, a number of our alternative custody, out-of-custody type programs. With the facility spaces there, and we've had conversations, in fact, in our work on trying to identify the strategies of the 10-year public safety plan. That was a discussion with mental health staff and Health and Human Services staff on the feasibility of putting that back together. I think somebody mentioned in the previous committee that was at the table, mentioned the difficulty of reinstalling programs once they're cut. And I think that's where we're at with the Sherman Center, is reinstalling a secure mental health facility in concert with the jail campus. Great idea to do, but it's going to cost and incur so much more energy to do it than it would have if we had kept it. We're seeing that in all of our systems, rebuilding the jail staffing back. We're 2 years into the jail levy. We're still down 12 positions before we can open the next pod of jail beds. It just takes so much time and effort to get there. So, anything we can do to continue or stop the continued erosion clearly is where we need to be. And, I'm conflicted. I have many needs in the sheriff's office. And so, it's difficult for me to be a champion for somebody else's programs and ask for resources to go there when I've got still gaping holes within the sheriff's office. But I clearly see this again as that broader public safety impact that we're seeing tragedies occur across the country, because this isn't an Oregon issue, this isn't a Lane County issue, but it's something we need to get a hold of, and I think it will have positive impacts on the sheriff's office, on our staff, and on the community as a whole.
Thank you.
I'm just going to pause for a second while we redial Commissioner Farr here. I don't know if he ran out of battery or what. Whoops. Don't forget the one. Just didn't want to have that ringing while someone was speaking.
Hi, Pat.
We got you back now? You there, Pat? Pat?
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm in contact.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry we lost you for a minute there. So we're still discussing the performance auditor's work plan.
Excellent. If I may slip in the queue in this moment, Mr. Chair.
And I will recognize you right now, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. Ms. Miller, thank you for your work on presenting this work plan to us. And as you heard Ms. Miller say, the financial indicators are going to be the number one issue. But there was a robust discussion surrounding behavioral health on the committee, and I'm glad Sheriff Trapp is there, because a number of the items that came up lower on the risk assessment evaluation also are tied in very closely to behavioral health, and it fits in very closely with a number of other issues that we're dealing with. And it was it was in fact a confirmation that behavioral health needs to be one of the main areas of focus that we as a board and as an organization need to be moving forward with for the coming year and beyond that. I'd like to thank you for that confirmation, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further discussion or questions for Ms. Miller? I will note that we do have staff here from Health and Human Services and Behavioral Health, Alicia Hayes and Lisa Nichols. Almost had it. Thank you. At least got Lisa. If there are any questions about that portion. I'll just insert myself in the queue here just to say I think the two items you've chosen for the work plan are excellent. And I think one of the things, we're seeing, now that we have an auditor in place, we're working with the audit committee to direct that we're seeing an additional level of accountability and transparency for citizens out there that this work plan is going to bring in the next year. And, we're talking about a very critical service. We just spent almost an hour on the Public Safety Coordinating Council's budget, and a lot of that discussion was the interaction between mental health and public safety and behavioral health in particular. So I really appreciate that audit item, and I really appreciate also the financial indicators. We also, during that discussion on the Public Safety Coordinating Council, talked about the next biennium. We did pretty well on this biennium, but what's going to happen to the state in the next biennium? And I think a lot of those financial indicators are going to help us keep track of the trending and let our citizens understand where the county is financially. and that's just an important part of that whole transparency and having people understand our finances, and then also understand that we're looking, after, trying to manage our risks that cost the citizens possible money, as well as looking for the best performance we can in these audits from our agencies that are spending their money. So really appreciate the work plan. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval of Order 15-8-18-8 in the matter of approving the county performance auditor's fiscal year 2015-16 work plan.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Ms. Miller.
Thank you.
So moving on to item 7A, County Council announcements. Any announcements, Mr. Dingle?
No announcements.
And we have no need for executive session today.
That's correct.
Great. Then we'll move on to item B, which is Order 1508-1809, in the matter of granting authority pursuant to ORS 476280 to extinguish uncontrolled fires in unincorporated Lane County.
Chair Bozovich and members of the board, these are the orders that I believe we had 2 work sessions on them. I believe we did. Anyway, I've did my level best to incorporate all the changes. This is the one you'll recall that simply grants authority to to put out fires that are in unincorporated Lane County and allow the fire department to recover the costs. And the map that shows that area is attached as A. I don't have anything unless you have a specific question.
Any questions for Mr. Dingle? See none, is there someone that wishes to make a motion? Commissioner Stewart.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval of Order 15-8-18-9 in the matter of granting authority pursuant to ORS 476.280 to extinguish uncontrolled fires in unincorporated Lane County.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Moving on to Order 1508-1810 in the matter of approving the delegation of authority incident commander. Mr. Dingle.
Yes, this was a part of the another order that was part of preparing in advance as much as possible for the for an emergency situation. And this is the one that talks about, and I think the important point to note here is that I worked with Ms. Cook to make sure that this order was integrated in with her EOP emergency operation plan. And essentially this just sets up as much as we can ahead of time for a conflagration request, which is the one you'll recall when a fire exceeds the resources of the local jurisdiction.
Any questions for Mr. Dingle? Then I will entertain a motion.
I'll do this.
Commissioner Lyken.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval of Order 15-08-18-10 in the matter of approving the delegation of authority incident commander.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item D, Order 1508-1811, in the matter of authorizing the county administrator to expend and commit county resources during an emergency until an emergency meeting of the board. Mr. Dingle.
Chair Bozovich, members of the board, again, a third order to deal with the emergencies in advance. I recall there was a discussion about how quickly the county administrator could exceed the authority that he's granted to spend money in the event of an emergency. So I believe that there was consensus on the board for 72 hours or until a regular special or emergency meeting of the board could be convened. And that really was designed to provide
protection for Mr. Mokroheinski in the event that he had to spend more money than that before the board could get together.
Any questions for council? Commissioner Sorensen.
One idea here is, and I think we discussed this, was putting a dollar amount on the county administrator's authority. And I guess upon thinking about this, my view is that if it's an emergency and we can't get the board together and the county administrator is in the role, or someone is in the role of making a decision about expending emergency resources, it seems like it's best to just put someone in charge and who knows who knows more about the fiscal limitations, real fiscal limitations, but to have them in the role of being able to act. I think it also involves maybe the concept of notifying the board that that authority has been assumed and giving the board authority and the 5 commissioners then in office authority to have a meeting rather than the county administrator simply using the authority without notification. And I'm wondering if we could modify this policy to do what I think we all want done here, and that is that one person in the organization would have emergency authority to commit resources. But I'm looking also to protect the public and actually to protect the administrator by a requirement that he notify the board, so the board, if they want to do more than what the county administrator's done, recognizing the county administrator might be reluctant to make decisions that are could be very controversial. Could there be a notice requirement for the news media or the board or both, so that everyone knows that this emergency authority has been invoked?
Chair Bozovich and Commissioner Sorensen, two comments. One, we did discuss the board did discuss and kick around the issue of a monetary amount, and you're correct. I believe the consensus was that in the middle of an emergency, the last thing that the administrator had to worry about was keeping the meter running and deciding when he was going to exceed his authority. And to your second point, if you look at the second paragraph of the order, this order that I've drafted, it specifically incorporates the last and final order, which is the one that the board discussed in terms of convening, in the event of emergency, convening and notifying a board as soon as possible. So actually, your second point has already been, is contained within this order, because it says that the administrator will, in accordance with this last board order, which is the one entitled in the matter of notifying board members of emergency and participating in emergency meetings. So the two are tied together. And of course they have every kind of board order requires public notification of the media, so that's incorporated within the act of calling the meeting.
All right, let me ask you this straight. If the administrator invokes this authority that we are giving the administrator by approving this board order, is there any requirement that the administrator notify the board that they have invoked this authority?
Yes, I believe it is in, you mean when you notify the board as a whole? Yes, because it's part of number 2 says that he will, or the Lane County Administrator will arrange an emergency meeting of the Lane County as soon as possible under the circumstances and which are set out in that other board order, and brief the Board of Commissioners on all resources expended under the authority of this order at the emergency meeting, or other meeting of the board, whichever occurs first. So yes, there is the requirement that as soon as reasonably possible under the circumstances. So there's no, and in any event, his authority to expend money expires in 72 hours. Yeah. So it's not like, I think to address your concern, it's not like he could just, spend money for 6 months under the guise of an emergency.
Well, obviously, these board orders are being done in the spirit of trying to anticipate problems that we reasonably think might occur. And when we went over a scenario planning exercise, and we discovered some sort of glitches in our current planning, I think these are all great follow-ups to that. I think that we would want to, maybe after we approve this, maybe think about in a year, how's this working? Should we make any changes? So that we're having a continuous improvement of this. And I appreciate your answers to my question about the delegation. You've answered all of them. The time limit on the authority, the triggering of a board meeting, the information to the commissioners, that's all helpful.
And the third, and Chair Bozovich, Commissioner Sorensen, to your last point, all four of these orders, the third point in them is that they shall be reviewed annually by the board, but you'll notice the way that I wrote it is if for some reason it fell off the radar, it doesn't affect their continuing validity. So you're correct. These board orders were all a reflection of the board's attempt to balance sort of the reality of what would happen in an emergency with transparency and with the board's oversight. And for what it's worth, I believe they've achieved that. Oops.
You just said he may lose contact.
All right, well, I think Commissioner Farr's on the move and hit a cell phone dead zone there, so I think we've lost Commissioner Farr from the meeting at this time. Is there any further questions about this board order for council? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Commissioner Stewart.
Mr. Chair, I'd move approval of Order 15-8-18-11 in the matter of authorizing the county administrator to expend and commit county resources during an emergency until an emergency meeting of the board.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously with Commissioner Farr excused at this time. That brings us to our final of these group of board orders, Order 1508-1812, in the matter of notifying board members of emergency meetings and board participation in emergency meetings. Mr. Dingell.
Chair Bozovich and members of the board, we made some minor, or actually I wouldn't say minor, we made some changes to this from the last time we were together at the suggestion of Commissioner Sorensen. And you'll notice that in number 2, we specifically, although I think it was there, we explicitly incorporated Oregon law in terms of, and the Lane Charter in terms of how the rules governing the calling of meetings. There's also, we stated in number 3 that it wouldn't happen until there was a quorum of the members had acknowledged the receipt of it. And we added number 4, which again encouraged the participation of all board members in any way possible that they could participate. And I think that we referenced back to the exercise that Commissioner Sorensen mentioned that we, was that earlier this spring? In any event, where it was, a person may not be able to participate by telephone, but they might be able to participate another way. And again, this was the idea was that the board valued everyone's input at that kind of meeting. So I think this order reflects that.
Any questions for Commissioner Sorensen?
I noticed that the board order says that the county administrator can convene a meeting of the Board of Commissioners. And doesn't that conflict with the Lane County Charter that says that the chair, vice chair, or another member of the board may convene a meeting of the board? I'm raising a kind of a legal issue here. Can you?
I don't, if you're referring to number 1, it doesn't say convene, it says call for.
Okay, call for.
Yeah. So that's what, I mean, that's what I'm trying to get. If you read the call, I see what you're saying. I could, I mean, to make it crystal clear, we could put for after called.
One way to do that is leave the county administrator out of the process of convening the board meeting and just simply say the county administrator or designee shall attempt to arrange a board meeting. The chair, vice chair, or, in whatever language is in the charter, may convene the meeting of the board. I'm questioning the issue of having the administrator involved in the formal process of starting the board meeting. And I gather, the purpose of it is, hey, we want the county administrator to make sure there's a board meeting, because we just passed a board order saying the county administrator is the one that can expend emergency resources.
Yeah, I understand the issue. I'm not using the word convene there. I really think the simple solution to the concern that you've expressed would be to simply add the word for after called for, as opposed, it's clear it's not convened. It's just he's calling for a meeting.
Gotcha.
And I think that would address it. There's, and you are correct, because this board order incorporates other provisions of Oregon law, the county administrator clearly does not have the authority to convene a meeting under Oregon law. So I think that that's adequately covered there.
Is there anything in the charter that is there anything in the charter that conflicts with this proposed board order?
No. Chair Bozovich, Commissioner Sorensen, no. The only piece in the charter that would deal with this would be the sections that deal with the county administrator and their duties and the board and their duties, and I don't see any conflict at all. And in fact, like I said, one of the things I've been trying to do is to with these types of orders that are going to be continuing along with sections of the manual and the code, is to simply incorporate the existing law and the charter so that it's clear we're not, even if we inadvertently do it, we're not trying to conflict with what is already the board's authority and the administrator's authority.
For example, I know the charter predates the Oregon Open Meetings Law, and one of the things that it says is that the commissioners will be notified of board meetings. Now, that was before the idea that, well, we'd also want to notify the press and staff and lots of other people. But there have been instances where the board has been convened on an emergency basis, and the commissioners were informed via, two methods. Some were called on the phone, and some were emailed, and some were both. And so I'm looking for a equality provision here on the methods by which we inform the commissioners, so that we're not just doing a legal or minimalist notice, such as in a newspaper, or maybe via email, when, let's say, the ones that the county administrator wants to come to the board meeting. Not that this county administrator would do that, but the ones that the county administrator wants to come to the meeting would notify those commissioners, and the other ones would maybe get notified by publication or some other method.
Well, and actually that's addressed in number 2.
Okay.
As what it says is that we obviously, the floor for notification is that which is set by Oregon law and the public meetings law. However, what it went on is, you'll notice it says, shall be made using cell phones, text, email, landlines, if possible, or any other means reasonably likely to notify board members of the meeting. And you'll notice that last sentence, which I believe we actually had, we actually used when we called you, is the board members will tell the board secretary what is there, you see it says with secondary telephone numbers. So the idea is that you will, as a board member, designate to the board secretary your preferred method. In other words, you might, Mr. Sorensen, you might choose to have your primary means as your home landline and your secondary means as your cell phone, and Chair Bozovich might do his cell phone as his primary one, and his secondary one would be his text or his email address. So I think that's adequately covered there, that it's up to, it is up to the individual commissioner to make sure that they get that information to the board secretary. But as I understand, it worked out well with you when you were on vacation.
Yeah,
she went through the sequence of the numbers that you were given.
Thank you. And my final question has to do with the issue of the backups for department directors. When we have an emergency meeting, I would like to know if who are the backups for the department directors. So we have at a simple level, we have I'm just going to name a few. We have you, we have Steve, we have Public Works, we have Health and Human Services, we have Sheriff, we have DA, we have Assessor. We don't know exactly in an emergency who's going to be available. And it's probably not possible to know every person, but if we could have a policy that the county, that these department directors, I'm just using the phrase department director, everybody has a different title, right? You're the county council, assessor, director of assessment and taxation. They all have different titles, but the important people in the county administration of this county government, it seems to me, should be on alert, because one of their departments is probably going to be really involved in this emergency. It's unlikely that all of them will, but the time to find out who the backup is ahead of the crisis. And so I'm wondering if there's a way for us, either in this board or another one, to require that administrators of a certain level or rank have a designated backup, and that they're not on vacation when their designated backup is on vacation, and that there's some recognition that there's a responsibility, other than to say, my boss will be back tomorrow. There's some responsibility in being the backup. So I would like your thoughts on how to handle that.
Well, Chair Bozovich, Commissioner Sorensen, I don't think that this board order is the place to do that. You raise a good point. I think that the default position would be one would assume would be the assistant directors for the different departments, the chief deputy in the district attorney's office, the chief deputy in the sheriff's office. I don't see anything wrong with
that. I think we're getting into the emergency action plan, which is coming back before the board in September with Linda Cook. And I also think this is really under the county administrator's purview to have his chain of command set out and maybe expressed to us. A board order, about how we're going to call an emergency meeting is not the place to stick this particular item into. I think it's a completely separate discussion about emergency preparedness and having the chain of commands clearly spelt out and the delegation of authority that follows that chain of command. And it's scheduled for a future board meeting. So,
yeah, I appreciate that, and thanks for the information about that. I think that would be helpful. Regarding the actual board order under consideration, this is from memory, but I recall that there were 3 people that could designate a call a board meeting: the board chair, the vice chair, and the senior commissioner by seniority. So in this board order, you say any board member can call a board meeting. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, again, it's calling for it, and so what I think the intention here was to be as flexible depending upon, because in theory, in theory, it might not be any of those individuals who is the one that's in communication that initiates it.
Yep.
And I don't think we all want to sit around and wait and say, well, we got to wait for one of these three people to surface when they either might be in communication or they might be dead.
But you can't have a board meeting unless you can find one of those three anyway.
Well, that's true. You need a quorum. But I think the idea here was to be as flexible as possible, and I don't see any problem or conflict with that. Because, again, they're just simply calling for saying, I think we need to get together and have a meeting.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between calling for versus convene, which is the language in the charter.
And I think the idea was that it was to get everyone recognized that there was going to be a process, Commissioner Sorensen, so I think the idea was to get it started as soon as possible. And if that started with the administrator or it started with the most junior member of the board, then it's going to get the process going forward.
Any further questions or discussion on the order? And I'll entertain a motion. Commissioner Stewart.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval of Order 15-8-18-12 in the matter of notifying board members of emergency meetings and board participation in emergency meetings with one amendment, the inclusion or the addition of for.
Did you want, are you referring to?
Adding the word for following called.
So the motion would be to amend number 1 to read an emergency meeting may be called for.
Correct.
By the county administrator.
Second.
Any discussion in the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously with Commissioner Farr excused. Thank you. And I just want to note, for the public, that those last 4 board orders were a result of work sessions that the board had on emergency action planning and trying to look forward. And whether it's the subduction zone earthquake that the New Yorker article is referring to, or just a wildfire south of Lorraine that may create an issue, this is about just having the administrative stuff taken care of up front, so we have those authorities clearly defined and actions, things like how we get notified and all that, rather than scrambling around in the moment trying to figure all that out. So I really appreciate the work that County Council's done on this.
Thank you.
So moving on to Commissioners' business, the first item is announcements from Commissioners. Any announcements? Seeing and hearing none, then we already took care of item 8B, which moves us on to item 8C, is report and possible action on a formal position of the Lane County Board of Commissioners with respect to the draft resource management plan for Western Oregon. And we have Alex Kyler, our Intergovernmental Affairs Manager, and I'll turn it over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Alex Kyler. I'm Lane County's Intergovernmental Relations Manager. And I prepared a board memo that summarizes the agenda item for you today. Essentially, we have a period of public comment that ends later this week. And the comment is on the resource management plan, the draft resource management plan issued by the Bureau of Land Management for Western Oregon, 4 volumes of material here. This action follows a meeting that you had, or presentation you had at your regular scheduled meeting 2 weeks ago by Chris Cadwell, a former forester with the BLM, now an independent consultant, who talked to you about some of the planning processes and details within the plan. After that meeting, you directed that staff prepare some comments, and the comments that I worked up I think are consistent with some of the key points that Mr. Cadwell made during the meeting, and then some of the comments that commissioners brought up in their conversations with him as part of the follow-up to his presentation. What I tried to do was, first thing I tried to do, Mr. Chair and board members, was reach out to peers in other ONC counties to see what they were doing. And so I had good dialogue with folks in Jackson County, Josephine County,
and Douglas County, as well as some consultation with the director of the Association of O&C Counties to just sort of see what people were doing. The other conversation that I've had is with the Department of Forestry, the Oregon Department of Forestry, because I think, as I indicated in the board memo, is that this plan, after the public comment period occurs, there's also a 60-day consistency review, what's called a consistency review, that the governor will undertake, and that's part of the law, that the governor does this consistency review. And so I was sort of curious to see what the state agencies were doing in response to the plan, and I had a conversation with them, and I think Commissioner Stewart was actually at a meeting with the governor's office to talk a little bit about some of their approaches to the issue. So at any rate, that effort of reaching out to my peers and reading through the plan resulted in, I think, about 14 pages of comment that I tried to organize in such a way as to be consistent with the 1937 O&C Act. So to really try to hit the high points of the O&C Act, which speaks to the purposes of managing the forest for sustained yield for the with revenues supporting counties, addresses the issue of recreation and watershed protection. And the other thing I tried to touch on a little bit was the conversation that did come up with Mr. Cadwell about the critical habitat designation for the northern spotted owl. And so we've got a little bit of comment about that. And then finally, followed by some concluding remarks. Let's see, the other thing that I tried to touch on was to ensure that in terms of consistency, the law speaks to making sure that the resource management plan is consistent with local planning. And so I also reviewed our rural comprehensive plan to seek out what that plan says about federal forest management. And so I tried to work that into our comments as well. The only thing that I would really bring up, there's two things that I'd like to bring to your attention. On page 1 of the comments, these are what I refer to as your findings after review. I titled this Section A, Planning Process Violates the Purpose of the Oregon and California Railroad Grant. Subsequent to the publishing of this document, I did hear one piece of suggestion was to change that to the O&C Act of 1937 rather than the Oregon and California Railroad Grant. And with your permission, Mr. Chair, I'll just delve into that first.
Sure.
So the issue here is that the Oregon and California Railroad Grant, I don't know the exact date, but I mean, we're going back into the late 1800s here, after the land grants that connected the eastern and western parts of the United States. There was another land grant that sought to connect the markets in Portland with the markets in San Francisco. And essentially, that's when things started to go awry in the history of the O&C lands, with the railroad that was being constructed being convicted of fraudulently selling lands to actual settlers, which was part of this requirement of these railroad grants. They called it the Settlers Clause. And Douglas County in their comments, gets into that history fairly significantly. But the idea was, back then, that this selling of lands to actual settlers would result in what they referred to as the upbuilding of the region, and essentially the creation of taxable lands that would provide revenue to counties through the property tax structure. And so what they were trying to do in Douglas County was to sort of paint that picture of the 1937 Act stemming from all the way back to these land grants of, I think they were 1855 or 1866, one of those 2 years, where that history started to suggest that these land grants would result in development. Because of the fraudulent action of the railroad, there were several actions of Congress in the early part of the 1900s. And those actions were designed to rectify this wrong that had been occurred by the railroad, and essentially culminated in the 1937 Act to say, okay, the final thing that we will do here is we will create a management structure and a revenue sharing structure that results in this revenue to counties for the purposes of providing essential services. Long story short, the feedback I received was, it may be better to title this, "The planning process violates the purpose of the ONC Act of 1937," rather than going back to that other ONC railroad grant, because I don't really paint that picture as well as Douglas County did in their comments in terms of tying this all the way back to the initial land grants. So that was the first comment. The other thing that I've contemplated since writing this is, and I went back and reviewed it some more this morning, but I think we're all aware, in fact, your conversation this morning at the board was centered around some of the issues around wildfires in Western Oregon. The plan does touch on wildfire management, but I'm not sure that to the extent that the plan touches on wildfire management, it looks at the historical issues of wildfire in Western Oregon. And as far as I can tell, the BLM's peer agency with respect to forest management in Oregon, the United States Forest Service, for example, is really trying to anticipate and addressing some of the issues that they see occurring due to this changing climate that apparently is occurring here, where we've got a fire season that is documented to be about a month longer now, that the severity of fires is more intense, and this translates into significant costs for firefighting. And I think the issue that I contemplated was, as the governor is looking at their consistency review, certainly the legislature has been dealing with this, grappling with how to manage costs related to firefighting in Western Oregon. And to me, I'm not sure that we did enough to really talk about firefighting and the costs related to firefighting with the comments. But I'll leave that up to you. If we are up against a timeline. I did touch on it in some parts of the document, but it may be, like I said, more of an issue with respect to the governor's consistency review. I will tell you that I did bring that up with the Department of Forestry in a conversation that I had yesterday, and they're aware of it, at least from the email I got. They do agree that the draft document forecasts future fire activity based on the previous 20-year history, and then go on to say such an approach assumes a lot, including the same weather patterns and initial attack response. So there's, I think they are contemplating that. I do not know exactly what the status of their comments are, nor do I know if they intend to submit comment by the 21st, or if they're going to wait for their comment to be part of that formal 60-day consistency review that's established under federal law. So I'll leave you with those two questions. One's fairly minor in terms of the document, one's a little bit more regarding the content of our specific comments. And with that, I think I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have at this time, Mr. Chair or Commissioners. Commissioner Sorensen.
With regard to the matter of carbon storage, does the proposed RMP, I forgot what that stands for,
Resource management.
Resource
plan.
Management Plan,
Yeah.
does the draft Resources Management Plan provide for the sale or lease of carbon storage to the private sector? In other words, we're going to store some carbon, it's going to be a good thing, we're going to get some revenue. Our comments, or at least the proposal you have, is there's none of which accrues to counties. Why is that, if that's not a resource that we would be entitled to under the O&C Act of 1937?
Do you want to?
I can follow after your answer.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Alex.
Sure. Commissioner, Chairman Bozovich and Commissioner Sorensen, to my understanding, there is no revenue share that exists with respect to carbon storage, nor is there a mechanism for the sale of carbon credits from federal forest lands. If you recall, I want to say it was in the 2011 session, in fact, I'm sure it was in the 2011 session in the state of Oregon in the legislature, you sent me up to Salem with a priority to try to pass what's called a joint memorial, which is essentially a letter to Congress by the Oregon legislature. And we were successful with that effort to suggest that at the time, the framework that we expected to sort of see occur was that the then Governor Kulongoski would be successful in creating a formal framework called the Western Climate It was WCI, Western Climate Initiative, I believe.
Okay.
The Western Climate Initiative had a number of things regarding the sale of carbon credits, but none of which included the sale of carbon credits from federal timbers managed for carbon storage. And we then developed a House Joint Memorial that did pass both. Actually, I guess it didn't need to pass both. It just passed the House. But it did pass and was sent to Congress that suggested that if there was a couple ifs. If there was an energy bill, that was the other thing. President Obama at the time was working on an energy bill. And if the Western Climate Initiative was formalized, and if the federal government then managed lands for carbon credits, then there should be revenue stream to counties. I still believe that's a great idea. We haven't seen any further action, as to my knowledge, on the Western Climate Initiative, nor on the ability of the federal government to sell carbon credits. That said, there is sort of a dollar amount prescribed for carbon storage in the socioeconomic analysis. But again, we made the same point in this, is that as with the recreational dollars, there is no formal mechanism to take those dollars and then translate them into county revenue for the purpose of providing county services, as there is with the timber resource that is contained on those lands.
If I might, I'd just add too that also in the presentations from the BLM regarding this issue, it wasn't stemming around whether or not there was carbon credits to sell. It was really the impact of the management plans on the carbon storage. And according to both the BLM and the analysis by the O&C counties, there is no measurable difference in any of the plans in regards to the impact to the carbon storage that currently exists.
And Mr. Chair, I can give you just a little flavor of one of the things with respect to my previous point about fire is there's sort of let's see. There's a question about changes in the annual burned area and fire severity have clear implications for air quality, carbon storage potential, and greenhouse gas emissions as well. Greenhouse gas emissions would increase and carbon storage decrease as burned area and fire severity increase.
So you can see they start to touch on it, but they don't necessarily, they don't really have an alternative that shows anything with respect to the severity of wildfires that I think we're actually experiencing now, at least within the last couple of years. And that is, I think, one of the points that Mr. Cadwell was making was that the range of alternatives was not adequate, that there were these, essentially 5 alternatives, but the agency had an opportunity to sort of explore some other things that they did not with this process.
What's the rationale for using the phrase Southern Oregon with regard to the negative? You have a finding in here that there is an impact to Southern Oregon. What's the significance of that phrase?
The impact is how the supply, it really impacts the current infrastructure for timber mills, and under these plans, it's my understanding that, and represented with Mr. Kyler's comments, that the harvest is going to take place at a higher level more to the north than it is the south, so it's going to geographically negatively impact infrastructure that's in place. It's one of the key arguments that Josephine County has, that right now they're on a bubble of keeping Rough and Ready open, and the investment that the former governor made in that facility to keep it open. This could end up, any of these plans or these suggested RMP proposals would drastically impact their ability to continue to be in operation.
And Mr. Chair, I'll just do a follow-on there, that if you look at sort of the diversity of funding and the adequacy or lack thereof, the property tax and other revenues, there are, Multnomah County, Washington County, Marion County, Yamhill County, these are ONC counties. They tend to have higher permanent property tax rates and other things that Washington County has a real estate transfer tax, for example, that we do not. And if you look at just the historic distribution of ONC receipts as a percent of the total revenue, certainly the Southern Oregon counties are much more dependent on ONC revenue than those northern counties that I mentioned, Clackamas, Yamhill, Marion, Washington, Multnomah. They're under typically under about 10% of their historically their percent of total revenue from ONC receipts, whereas you look at Douglas County at almost 60% dependent on ONC receipts back in 1977 and 78. Lane County 23% dependent on ONC receipts as a percent of total revenue. So there is this variation from north to south in terms of the impact of management on the counties.
Are the counties taking the position when they approve resolutions like this that the National Environmental Policy Act requires a determination of whether poverty will increase or decrease with a proposed government action? In other words, I thought this was about whether or not we were going to change the management and have a revised management plan for these lands, as opposed to what's the impact on poverty in any given community, which may be related to that, but it may be related to low wages that people are receiving, or their low educational attainment, or the fact that there's other industries that are competing in that county which pay lower wages. So I know that everyone is concerned about poverty. They should be. Everybody should be concerned about poverty. But I thought the purpose of this environmental impact statement is to array the alternatives for the management of the land. And that alternative B, the preferred alternative, is one that at least a lot of the commissioners from the timber-dependent counties don't like because of the negative impact that they think it'll have on a particular mill owner, like Rough and Ready, or a particular population, like the people in Curry County, who may not get enough timber to keep their mills going, or may not even have mills at this point.
If I might just jump in here, Commissioner, it's my understanding the criteria for your NEPA process, and when you go through a environmental impact statement, social economics is one of the criteria that you analyze. I think that's probably one of the calling out differences here is a lot of the counties feel like that component wasn't represented well in the process, and it was more focused on species or environment management and didn't put equal weight towards the social economic. So I think that's why you have some of the differences there that are being pointed out, because they don't feel like it was represented. I think Mr. Kyler called that out in his comments too, the social economic component. It is a criteria. It's one of the pieces that has to be addressed in the NEPA process.
And Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sorensen, to follow on, there's almost 200 pages just dedicated to socioeconomics. There's a large section looking at the recreation industry and how that has created revenues from the lands that implicate how well folks are doing in the region. They certainly did. They've got a whole appendix about their study, and they looked at those poverty rates, and they have metrics for how they establish, the degree of poverty in the particular counties, and in fact some of the cities that they looked at. So I think if you look back at the 1937 Act, there's certainly that's one of the comments we're making, is that the purpose of these lands was to help sustain these communities. The purpose of the Act says, the Act says that the lands shall be managed to ensure a revenue stream, to provide services, and to sustain local communities. And, I think we're hard pressed to separate the socioeconomic trends that we've seen in Western Oregon from the management of federal timberlands in Western Oregon. I mean, they've always been part and parcel, and certainly we've taken some steps to try to diversify our economy locally, and I think other counties have as well. But when you live with this kind of resource, it's a very significant part of many people's lives, especially in the unincorporated areas. And that's the other comment that I suggest you make, is that the BLM really didn't even look at the unincorporated communities in terms of their study. They focused on municipalities and then interviewed community leaders in those municipalities. It's a very interesting section of the plan, because those community leaders certainly see the impact from the management trends of the lands, and yet we made the comment that the communities in Lane County that they singled out, which were Junction City and Florence, in fact are sort of separated from the ONC lands in a way. They're not necessarily as integrated into those forests as, for example, a city like Cottage Grove or Oak Ridge. But yet, even those communities indicated to the BLM researcher that tie between, economic health of their community and the status of federal forest management.
Commissioner Stewart and Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, I want to start by thanking Mr. Kyler, Alex, for a great job. I was able to spend quite a bit of time reviewing it yesterday to get the grasp of it. I would also state that yesterday I was able to, myself, Tony Hyde, President of the ONC counties, and Simon Hare, the Secretary Treasurer of ONC counties, we met with Mr. Whitman and Mr. Davis from the governor's office to present the comments that were going to be made by the ONC counties and some of the concerns that we have with the process. A lot of them are pretty much the same as what Mr. Kyler has pointed out here in our letter, but there was some more in-depth, the ONC counties has went more deeper into the data and questions how some of the data support some of the conclusions in the plan. So we drew out some of the differences. And the other piece that I was going to mention that we didn't touch on, that's been touched on by other counties, is the wildfire component. There's a real concern that after a wildfire and you have a post-fire conditions, there's very little corrective or management direction towards how you deal with that. And I think that's could be an area that if we felt we wanted to add some more comments to, try to encourage a quicker recovery process for those lands. What we're seeing currently right now under the current management plan is that the BLM is actively post-managing fire sites that they have the ability to. So whether it's a matrix land, they can do certain things, and other lands they can't do much. But the short of it is that the sites are usually larger than they can deal with timely, and then the second is that a lot of times the lands have restrictions on them that doesn't allow some of the post-harvest, which is critical in these lands being intermixed with private. It clearly shows that if you leave those lands unmanaged after the fire, and they're more than likely to experience multiple fires afterwards that can be just as devastating, just as the history of the Tillamook fire that burned multiple times. So I think that's the only place that probably is lacking in that I think we have the ability to comment on, is maybe some post-fire management in the plan that could be added.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
And Commissioner Stewart, I mean, I've contemplated this, and, I think where we are running up against this timing thing, one of the thoughts I had was that we could draft a letter to the governor's office to express our concerns and to sort of set the stage for that conversation when the governor gets to that consistency review. In order to, the governor is supposed to examine state and local planning to make sure that those state and local plans are consistent with the federal plan. And to me, I think putting something on the record to the governor's office indicating, perhaps this issue of fire management is something that we could do in a future meeting. And so we would still get our thoughts on the record. They wouldn't be necessarily to the agency, but at least they'd be to the governor's office. And I do think the opportunity exists there because the legislature, as I said, has been, really, especially this year, looking at this issue of fire resources and how much money it costs the state to adequately respond to fires, not only on state lands but on federal lands, as we do have a contract with the BLM to manage fires down on their lands. Or we don't, but the state does. So that might be a mechanism that I'd suggest that we could. You could direct me to prepare something to write to the governor's office to just suggest that, we've participated in this process. We understand that you're going to have this consistency review. One of the things that we contemplated was additional comment on firefighting issues and sort of line them out to the governor's office.
Okay. Well, I'm fine with that approach if my colleagues support it. Not necessarily saying that we should add these into this at this time because of the time frame, but in reviewing the various different comments that I've seen that's being submitted, that it is well represented in other comments, so I don't know that we necessarily need to duplicate it.
Commissioner Lykin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So here a couple questions, so this may be not only for Alex but for Commissioner Stewart as well. I mean, what we're really focusing in and should be really looking at is what's the revenue stream coming back to the counties. I mean, Lane County, along with several other counties in Oregon, have been so dependent on the harvest level that happens on these lands. So my question, I know Commissioner Stewart, you've been part of with the ONC Association, you've done a detailed analysis, first of all, of the DeFazio Schrader-Walden bill. I think you did a fairly detailed analysis of the Senator Wyden's ONC bill. So has ONC done a fairly significant analysis of of this particular piece that's coming from BLM and what, I'd like to know is where's the revenue here? I mean, that's probably the thing that has me a little bit disappointed. I mean, I'm going to say not a little bit, but very disappointed. And especially when you broke that down on how much value they're putting into recreation compared to, and I don't want to take that away, but it's almost a us versus them mentality instead of recreation, the job producing, all of that should be saying we're in this together instead of one versus the other one, which that's the piece that I'm extremely disappointed in. So I don't know, Commissioner Stewart, has ONC done an analysis of this, what the BLM's proposing as far as revenue is concerned? Or Alex, do you have maybe some information on that? And then the other is just what you're proposing to the governor's office. I mean, I'm fine with that, but I will say after what the state land board did with the Elliott State Forest, conditioning that so significantly that I think it took the production completely out of it. Sure, we can send a letter. It may just go on deaf ears, but I think at this point in time. But I just would like to kind of get an idea of where's the revenue, because we are being, in a sense, held hostage. When I look at this and realizing this is the revenue to still provide the critical services that Lane County provides for its citizens. So I don't know, Mr. Stewart, if you have comments on that, Alex, if either one I'm good with. So
sure. Well, I pulled up the chart that Chris Cadwell had performed of his analysis of the payments to counties. So historically, between 1960 to 2011, the historic average of payments was $134 million a year. So under the no action, which is currently the Northwest Forest Plan, it was projected to produce $47 million, and it hasn't done just a pittance of that. It's way less. Under Alternative B, which is the preferred, Alternative B is projecting at $36 million. But I'd like you to remember that when Mr. Cadwell was here, he doesn't believe that that number is actually going to produce because of the fact of the critical habitat that encumbers the harvestable land that's not placed into reserves, and the fact that if it does actually hit it, it wouldn't be sustainable. It would be for a short period of time. As was pointed out, that to hit sustainability on the lands, you'd have to have shorter rotations, more like larger harvests, more land to cover in shorter rotations to be able to maintain that level of harvest. So it's considerably less.
Do you recall what the House plan, the revenue that?
Well, the House plan was, and I'm trying to compare. I want to compare apples to apples. So the House plan would have projected close to 500 million board feet of harvest per year, which in turn would have gotten us, I think they were estimating somewhere between $9 and $11 million a year to Lane County's coffers. Under Alternative B, if everything was able to be harvested, they're projecting what appears to be some one-time harvest off reserves of about 97 million, and 234 million is what they're projecting off of the harvestable lands. So it's a little bit more than what's being harvested today, but not much. And if we were going by today's, we received a check earlier this year before Secure Rural Schools, and I believe it was close to $2 million, wasn't it? So that would generate probably a little more than $2 million to Lane County if we're trying to compare millions board feet harvested.
And Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Lyken, I think that's one of the things that we were trying to emphasize here, and that Mr. Cadwell was also trying to suggest, was that it was unfortunate that the BLM, I don't know why they did it necessarily, but they chose as sort of a baseline year 2012 and examined all their alternatives looking at 2012 as a baseline year. Well, 2012 was not a great year for harvest nor for SRS revenues, so sort of everything from anything from compared to 2012 looks pretty good. As Commissioner Stewart indicated, really what they should have done, what we believe they should have done, is to look at the plan as written, the 1995 RMP, and do at least an average from 1995 to the present of revenue to examine, okay, where do the alternatives lie compared to that metric rather than the metric of a single year. And that's encompassed in the comments, that that examination was somewhat questionable in terms of why didn't they look at that, the plan as written is the terminology.
Well, I appreciate Commissioner Stewart on the apples to apples. I think that's key, but I think it gives us a kind of an idea of what's in this plan compared to the potential that may have came from the House plan that was passed a couple years ago, and because again, this is about revenue coming to Lane County so we can continue to provide these critical services. And Alex, I think you hit it very well. This is about rural Lane County. This is really the focus should be on. This isn't necessarily about urban communities, but this is about rural Lane County, and really the potential continued devastating effects, notwithstanding the fire issue that's happening here, not only here in the western part. Thank God we're not in eastern Oregon this time around. I mean, that's where the real devastation is happening this time. But obviously Douglas County is dealing with the Stouts fire. But so I appreciate those answers. I think that's key as we move forward. Thanks for the draft of the letter. I think this puts I think my thoughts in where I'm coming from, formulates it well. Thank you.
So I'm sticking myself in the queue before we come back to you, Commissioner Sorensen. First, I just want to give my head nod to the concept of a separate letter concerning fire issues to the governor after the fact here. I'll agree that's probably the better plan. And one of the things I would ask, and I forgot to ask Mr. Cadwell when he was here, and maybe Alex or Commissioner Stewart, did the plan address travel management and roadless areas for particularly these large block reserves? One of the issues they had to deal with the Stouts Creek fire was they had to cut new roads in to fight it because of the lack of access. And it's a large concern, particularly for the private timberlands where they are adjacent to BLM lands. But that's, a real concern of mine is this trend that the federal government's gone to removing access for vehicles to forest lands when it's exactly what you need to fight fire and have any decent initial attack and not end up with these forest fires we're now fighting this summer, where it's tens of thousands of acres versus just a few thousand, and our ability to get in there and try and limit that. But I think that's something we can maybe address in that letter, the whole issue of their travel management and the desire to lose roads. And I'm glad that Commissioner Stewart brought up the idea of post-harvest issues. I brought that up last time when Mr. Cadwell was here. I've seen it happen twice now with two fires in the Douglas complex, Douglas and Big Windy complex down in Douglas County, and in that area, where they didn't get, by the time BLM got around on their portions of the burned area to doing salvage where they were even allowed to, because some of their stuff was Lake Succession reserves. They weren't even allowed to do salvage under the current Northwest Forest Plan. The timber had lost its value. In the meantime, all the private land that was adjacent to that timber was salvaged harvest by the private owners immediately, started almost immediately after the fire. And we saw the same thing in the Yellow Point fire. Now those burned over areas on the BLM lands are sitting there as ignition points. Those dead trees standing in now a dead forest are lightning rods. And there's, I can't remember the statistics, some of the folks from the BLM in their their foresters told us on that tour a couple summers ago of the Big Windy complex, but it's a significant amount of return of fire if you don't do salvage harvest. I mean, it's just like, you know, waiting for the next fire when you don't salvage. So there's got to be something in this plan that deals with post-fire salvage, or else we're just, you know, we can set aside large block reserves, and if you look at all the alternatives, there's a significant portion of northwest Lane County that's sitting there as reserves in all these alternatives. We just had a lightning strike fire in that area they managed to get by initial attack, you know, just a couple weeks ago in that passing thunderstorm, over an overnight thunderstorm. That could have been devastating. And if those large block reserves are going to be roadless and no salvage allowable, why have them? Because they're going to end up burnt to the ground in you know, in a Tillamook burn style fire if we ever get a nice northeast red flag day. It's just an accident waiting to happen. And I appreciate what you included about some of the other issues relative to the recreation economics and the value of county services in the comment letter. So I think you've done a really good job of capturing a lot of what was said and a lot of the comments during that work session last time, and preparing these comments on such short notice and on the deadline to meet the extension for the comments from the public. So Commissioner Sorensen?
I think in the interest of brevity, I'll pass.
Any other questions for Alex or comments? Then I would entertain maybe a motion that we submit these comments to the BLM because this is, we are under deadline. If we don't choose to take action today, we will not make any comment. Commissioner Stewart.
So, Mr. Chair, it was under the advice of Mr. Kyler that we changed the heading to include the 1937 ONC Act instead of the land grant. Is that correct?
That's in just Section A of the findings after review, Mr. Chair.
Section A. So I would move that we submit the comments with that amendment to the BLM's RMP process.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion to the motion. Commissioner Sorensen.
I'm going to be voting against this motion today. I think we are long past the time in Oregon history when local governments are asking the federal government to increase its cutting on federal lands. These lands belong to all of us, and they should be managed for a wide variety of purposes. And complaining that there's not enough cut being put out, to me, is a really bad idea. The reason these lands are in the shape they're in is because they have been overcut and they have not been managed properly. And overcutting these lands more isn't going to solve any problems. And I also question the value of timber cutting as opposed to the other important values that these lands will be providing in the future. And the riparian habitat and the reserves that the BLM is looking at it seems to me, is a better way to go than having us complaining about the amount of timber that's the BLM is thinking of taking off this land. So to me, it's going in the opposite direction of the rest of where our society and economy should be moving, and that is to a future of sustainability, a future where we integrate our economy into our environment. And I think that Lane County's comments and the comments of other timber counties or those counties controlled by those with the perspective of give the timber industry whatever they want, to me, that is not leading, and so I can't go along with these comments.
Further discussion, Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that really why I'm going to support this is really about revenue coming to Lane County so we can continue to provide critical services until we see meaningful tax reform. This is where this is the playground we have to continue to play in. And I don't think we're going to have an issue when it comes to as far as wood and to continue to build our homes, to build our communities. As we know, there's plenty that continues to come from Canada. The vast majority now of the plywood and veneer industry is coming from the country of Chile. But it would be nice if we saw some of this opportunity continue to happen right here in our own backyard. But again, this is about revenue to Lane County, and so we can continue to provide critical services. And, just hearing about yet another wood products mill here locally who took the risk and were just to the point where they could no longer rely on the federal government, took a risk and purchased their own lands to harvest because it made sense to them, because of the business they're continuing to provide, the jobs they're continuing to provide, and I really salute them because they are continuing to provide good manufacturing family wage jobs. But what happens there is that because the lack of harvest happened on the federal public lands, the revenue stream to Lane County has stopped even from that standpoint because of another mill taking that out of the equation. So I think it's important that we do send this message and that rural Lane County is dependent on these revenues, and so I support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stewart.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm obviously going to support this. I believe that the BLM has not met what I believe the charge is under the ONC Act, under the law, to manage the land sustainably. They put together a proposal that is, in my opinion, less than the current plan that's on the books, and I expect it to produce better results, which I don't know how that equates. And the fact of the matter that the reason that the BLM was charged to do these resource management plans clear back into 2000 was that they lost a federal court case and agreed to go back and create a plan that met the ONC requirements under the ONC Act. And here we have a proposal before us today that is less than the current plan that was proven by the courts was proven by the courts to be deficient, and we're here to support it, or being asked to support it. I can't bring myself to support the current plan. And to echo a little bit with Commissioner Lyken, if I think back 30 plus years ago and I look at rural eastern Lane County was in pretty good shape. They had living wage jobs, single family wage earners were able to provide their needs. Most of the citizens out in rural Lane County in my district were able to provide for themselves, and you look forward to today, 30 years later, following the decline of the industry that supported them. Most of those folks are struggling to make ends meet, if not in poverty. And I believe that this is an opportunity to find some middle ground in managing these lands, manage them for the values that we want. We can still manage for clean air and water and still produce a product or have some resource that would allow for industry to manufacture a product that would generate wealth, which would put people to work and help our state immensely by generating wealth and bringing dollars in from outside the state to help pay for services. It'd be nice that if rural Lane County could support itself again. But unfortunately, the cards are stacked right now against them, and they don't have the ability to produce for themselves. So I'm hoping that through this process that the BLM will maybe add a couple more alternatives, go back, add a couple more alternatives, and come up with something that is a little bit closer to the law than what they presented.
And I'd just like to state that I will be supporting this motion and the comments that we're going to be submitting to the BLM. Our comments are based on good science and economics. Unfortunately, some of the rhetoric that we hear, particularly the term overcutting in the 70s and 80s, that's a myth. And a lot of what is blamed on for that is actually the result of invasive species and other issues, or even bad science back in those days where loggers were being asked to remove wood from streams instead of placing it in streams. And we've all, understood that we've changed our methods of forestry and understand the science much better. And under today's science, we need to increase our jobs in our rural areas. It's about poverty. It's surprising to see folks that would be willing to support mandatory $15 an hour minimum wages denigrate the timber industry, where the cheapest paying job on a timber landing is $18 to $20 an hour as a choker setter, whereas the recreation jobs they like to push are mostly minimum wage, less than $10 an hour jobs. So, I just, really find that difficult to understand, but I believe in good science and good economics, and I think our comments are based on both of those things. The true issue with a lot of what's happened in the past is when bad science and bad economics have been used. And I really appreciate, Alex, for the work you did. That is one, I will have to agree with Commissioner Sorensen. We are subsidizing the paper industry with these plans, and it is a stack of paper to go through. And I really appreciate the willingness of the ONC Counties Association to engage Mr. Cadwell to come in here and explain from an expert's point of view what each alternative means, and some of the deficits in the plan, like the failure to think about critical spotted owl critical habitat overlays and how they interact with the four alternatives they presented, which they didn't even take into account in this plan. So even the harvest levels they claim are fantasy levels to a certain extent, in that they're ignoring a whole nother portion of federal law. So I really appreciate the work you've done. It was a lot of work to do in a short period of time to put this set of comments together, so I'll be voting in favor. Is there any other further discussion of the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
Motion passes 3-1 with Commissioner Farr excused and Commissioner Sorensen in dissent. So that gets us down to item 8D, which is agenda team request, and we are getting a little bit in the lunch hour, and I was determined that we're going to take a lunch today. And work session requests. So I am going to use chair's prerogative, and I am going to recess this meeting until 1:30 when we have a time certain item for public hearing. So we are now recessed, and we will reconvene at 1:30.